You think leaving me was brave, baby? I know where your sister lives. I know where you teach. I know the name of every single person you'd run to. And I will make your life so small you'll beg to come back." He said that over candlelight, over $100 bottle of wine, with a smile on his face that never reached his eyes. And Elena Carter sat across from him in a blue dress she wore because she was afraid not to, and she smiled back, because that was what surviving looked like from the outside. A smile, a nodded head. A woman who had learned that the most dangerous place in the world was not a dark alley. It was a white tablecloth. If this story is already making your chest tight, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel, ring that bell, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's story travels. Now let's go back to that restaurant, because what happens next changes everything. The text came at 4:47 in the afternoon while Elena Carter was erasing the day's math problems from her whiteboard. Carmine's, 7 p.m. Don't be late. I picked it for you. 4 sentences. No question mark anywhere. No. Are you free, or does that work for you? Because those were the kinds of questions men asked women they respected, and Darren Mitchell had a different vocabulary entirely. Elena read the message twice. Then she set her phone face down on her desk and stood very still for a moment, chalk dust on her fingers, the empty classroom around her holding its breath. Her coworker Patricia appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand, reading glasses pushed up on her head, the comfortable disorder of a woman who had survived 22 years of 3rd grade. "You okay?" Patricia asked. "You look like someone walked over your grave." "I'm fine." Elena picked up her phone, put it in her bag. Darren texted. Patricia's face did something complicated. "And he made a reservation." Elena put on her coat. "Italian place on Michigan." "Elena." Patricia set down her coffee. "You don't have to go." "I know." She buttoned her coat. Her fingers were steady. She had learned how to make her hands behave, even when everything else was shaking. "It's just dinner." Patricia looked at her for a long moment, the way a woman looks at another woman when she knows the truth and knows she hasn't been given permission to say it. "Text me when you're home," Patricia said finally. "I will," said Elena. She would not. The 4 sentences without a question mark. The coat buttoned with steady hands. The lie that cost nothing to tell. She wore the blue dress, not because she wanted to, not because it was her favorite. It hadn't been for a long time. She wore it because 18 months of living inside Darren Mitchell's idea of a relationship had taught her a brutal practical calculus. Certain colors bought her a quieter evening. Certain silences bought her a night without consequences. Certain smiles deployed at the right moment were the difference between walking to her car without incident and explaining a bruise to her doctor with a story she'd rehearsed in advance. This was not love. She knew that now. She had known it for a long time. But knowing and leaving were 2 different countries separated by a border she hadn't yet figured out how to cross. She took the red line downtown. On the train, a young woman across the aisle was laughing at something on her phone. Easy, uncomplicated laughter. The laughter of someone who didn't have to think about what expression to wear when she walked through a door. Elena watched her and felt something she couldn't name. Not envy exactly, something quieter. A recognition of distance. The train lurched. The woman kept laughing. Elena looked at her reflection in the dark window and practiced her smile. Son. Carmine's was everything Darren loved, which meant it was everything designed to make him feel important, and everyone around him feel slightly insufficient. White tablecloths, real candles, waiters in black who moved like they'd been trained not to exist until summoned. Darren was already at the table when she arrived. He always arrived first. This was deliberate, she understood that now. Arriving first meant he was already settled, already in possession of the space, already the one who watched you walk toward him, rather than the one who had to cross a room under someone else's gaze. He stood when he saw her. He always stood. In public, Darren Mitchell was the kind of man other women pointed out to their friends. Look at that, he stood up. He kissed her cheek. His hand pressed the small of her back briefly firmly, the pressure calibrated to say mine without saying a word. "The blue dress," he said, stepping back to look at her with an expression of warm approval. "You always know." "Thank you for the reservation," she said. They sat. He ordered for both of them before she had opened her menu. She had stopped mentioning this. The first time she'd said, "Actually, I think I'll have the..." He had smiled at her with such patient disappointment, such gentle bewilderment. "I was just trying to take care of you, Elena." Is that a crime that she'd understood the calculus immediately? The ordering was not a preference. It was a demonstration. The man who always arrives first. The hand on her back. The menu she never opened. Getete. For a while, for long enough that she felt the dangerous loosening of relief, it was almost quiet. Darren talked about his week. A complicated closing on a commercial property. A partner at the firm who was in his measured assessment deeply mediocre. He talked the way he always did in public, fluent, confident, the voice of a man who had learned early that rooms tended to organize themselves around whoever spoke with the most certainty. Elena listened. She had become an expert listener. Not because she was interested, though she had been once long ago in those first months when he was still performing the version of himself he wanted her to fall in love with. She listened now the way you monitored weather, tracking the texture, the pauses, the slight change in register that meant something was building. Tonight's pauses were longer than usual. "You're quiet," he said during the bread course. "Long week," she said. "The kids are restless before spring break." "You always say that." He looked at her pleasantly. "You use tired as a full stop, Elena. Every time I try to reach you, tired appears like a little wall." "I'm not building walls," she said. Careful, measured. I know you're not." He smiled. "I'm not accusing. I'm sharing an observation. There's a difference." She said nothing. He watched her. This was one of his techniques, and she called them techniques now in her own head, because naming them helped her survive them, the observation delivered as concern. I'm just saying that was never just anything. He was skilled enough to make her feel that any objection she raised was evidence of the problem he'd identified. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'll try to be more present." Something satisfied moved through his expression too quickly for anyone else to catch. "That's all I ask," he said. Mini-climax number 3, the technique. The observation as a weapon. The apology she made for his cruelty. The main course arrived. He had ordered her pasta. She didn't like pasta particularly. She would have chosen the fish, but she ate it without comment. The food was excellent. She tasted almost none of it. Then his hand found her wrist under the table. Not violent. It was never violent at the beginning. That was the part no one on the outside understood. It started so gently it could almost be tenderness. His fingers circling the inside of her wrist like a bracelet, like something precious. And then the pressure slowly increasing, increment by increment, degree by degree, until it sat at the precise threshold between this could be affection and this could be a warning. She kept her face completely still. This was her most honed skill, the absolute stillness. A face that revealed nothing, gave away nothing, could not be used against her. She had practiced it so long it had become second nature, a mask she put on the way other women put on lipstick, automatic, necessary, just part of getting through the day. "I've been thinking about us," Darren said. His voice was easy, conversational. A man and a woman at a nice restaurant having a grown-up discussion. "I've given you the space you asked for. 3 months, Elena. 3 months of patience. I appreciate..." "Let me finish." The pressure increased. Not dramatically, just enough. 3 months, and I've done work, real work. I've been honest with myself about my shortcomings. You know I have because I told you about the therapy sessions, which was not easy for me. He paused to let that land. And I think what I've earned at minimum is a real conversation. Not you sitting across from me with that face. "What face?" she asked softly. "The face that isn't yours," he said. "The face you wear when you've already decided, and you're just waiting for the evening to be over." He released her wrist. picked up his fork, smiled at her. She looked down at her pasta and thought, he just described exactly what I'm doing and presented it as something I should be ashamed of. The wrist, the threshold, the smile that followed. I ran into your sister, he said. Elena's fork stopped moving. Last Saturday, farmer's market on Clark. He cut into his food with precise, unhurried movements. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. She mentioned you've been staying with a friend Cassie, she said. North Side somewhere. The way he said Cassie. The slight weight he put on it, the faintest note of satisfaction, like a chess player confirming a piece, is exactly where he put it. You didn't have to do that, Elena said. Her voice was very quiet. I ran into her, Elena. I can't help running into people. He looked up with genuine seeming puzzlement. Is there a reason I shouldn't speak to your family? She didn't know we were... Right. She didn't know. He nodded slowly. Interesting situation, that. A family that doesn't know what's happening with their own daughter. He sipped his wine. I explained that you've been going through something. That I've been worried. That we're working on things. He paused. She seemed relieved, honestly. She said she'd been worried about you too. Said you'd been distant. The word dropped onto the table like a stone. Distant. Elena understood with sudden cold clarity what she was sitting across from. Not a man who missed her. Not a man who had done therapy and grown. A man who had spent 90 days while she thought she was building a wall between her life and him, quietly, methodically laying the groundwork. Talking to her family. Constructing a narrative. Elena is struggling. Elena is going through something. Elena needs Darren. He hadn't just planned this dinner. He had planned the story that would come after it. The sister. The narrative already built. The trap already laid while she thought she was free. She excused herself. In the restroom, marble counters, soft lighting. The kind of elegant privacy that money purchased, she ran cold water over the inside of her wrists and looked at herself in the mirror. The blue dress. The practiced stillness in her face. The woman who had made herself small enough to survive. She thought about calling Patricia. I'm at dinner, and I'm scared. That was the true sentence. But it was a sentence that required so much context. Years of context. A whole education in the specific mechanics of this particular kind of fear that she didn't know how to fit it into a phone call from a restaurant restroom. She thought about just walking out, taking the elevator down, hailing a cab on Michigan Avenue going to Cassie's, and changing the locks on her heart. She dried her hands. She looked at herself for one more moment. You're going to be okay, she thought. The way you think something when you're trying to make it true by believing it hard enough. Then she went back to the table. The restaurant had filled while she was gone. White tablecloths in every direction, low candlelight, the civilized murmur of other people's Wednesday evenings. Somewhere nearby, a woman laughed, the real kind, unguarded and genuine, and the sound caught in Elena's chest like a splinter. She almost didn't notice the man at the adjacent table. He was alone, which was slightly unusual. A man dining alone at Carmine's on a Wednesday, perhaps 45, perhaps older. Dark hair, silvering at the temples. He wore a dark suit with the ease of someone who hadn't chosen it to impress anyone. He sat very still. Not the fidgety stillness of someone waiting for something. The rooted stillness of someone who was exactly where they meant to be. His hands rested on the table, unmoving, patient. She registered him the way you register furniture shape and presence, no detail, and then she looked away. She had other things to manage. Mini climax number 6. The still man. The hands that didn't move. The woman who almost didn't notice. Darren was in a better mood when she returned. This was the rhythm she knew in her bones. The tightening, then the release, then the warmth that flooded into the space left behind. And the warmth was the most dangerous part because it was real. That was what she needed people to understand. The warmth was always real. He would reach across the table and cover her hand with his, and his eyes would carry something that genuinely looked like love, and some stubborn surviving part of her would respond to it before her mind could stop it. This is the design, she thought. He tightens. You brace. He releases. You feel relief. The relief becomes gratitude. The gratitude looks like love. And somewhere in that cycle you forget that the tightening was his choice. You know what I missed. He set his hand over hers, his eyes warm and direct. Exactly this. Sitting across from you. Not arguing, not navigating all the noise. Just us. He squeezed her hand. We make sense together, Elena. You know we do. Darren. I know. He held up his other hand in a gesture of peace. I hear you. I've heard everything you said the night you left. And I've sat with it. I have. He paused. But I need you to hear me now. I am not the same man I was in March. I have done actual work on myself. And you walking away without giving me the chance to show you that that's not fair. You know that's not fair. She looked at his hand over hers. She thought about March, the bruise along her upper arm, three-fingered purple-blue that she'd covered with cardigans for 11 days. She thought about the night she'd called her sister from the bathroom floor and hung up before the call connected. She thought about the morning the bag was packed and her hands were shaking, and she walked out of his apartment and took 3 buses to Cassie's place instead of a cab because she was afraid he had apps on her phone. I need more time, she said. The warmth in his eyes went flat. Not angry. Not yet. Something more precise than anger. A recalibration, a door closing quietly but firmly. The expression of a man who has just determined that patience has a limit, and they are standing on it. No, he said. The word landed like a hand on the table. What? Elena said. No. He said it again, simply without heat. You've had time. 3 months is time. I've been generous, Elena, and I think somewhere you know that, and I think the time for more time is over. He looked at her steadily. You come home. We rebuild. That's what happens next. Not a question. An announcement. An itinerary already printed. Mini climax number 7. The one word without heat. The itinerary. The future she hadn't been asked about. The check came. Darren paid it without discussion. He always paid, which she had spent a long time understanding. The paying was not generosity. Generosity left the door open. The paying was ownership. This meal this evening, this woman opposite all of it filed under his name. He set the leather folder back on the white cloth. Looked at her. I'm going to use the restroom, he said. He pushed his chair back and stood, buttoned his jacket. Then he leaned down, one hand on the back of her chair, his mouth close to her ear, his voice dropping to the quiet register he reserved for the things that mattered most, and he said, Don't even think about leaving. Not raised, not ugly, not the voice you'd recognize as a threat from across the room. The voice of a man reminding someone of a fact they both already understand the way you'd remind someone the stove was still on. Quiet, certain, final. Then he straightened, smiled at a passing waiter, and walked toward the back of the restaurant. Mini climax number 8. The whisper, the certainty, the smile at the waiter immediately after. Elena sat very still. The candle between them had burned low enough to gutter in drafts she couldn't feel. The restaurant moved around her, someone celebrating a birthday 3 tables over, the distant percussion of the kitchen, a waiter reciting specials to a couple who hadn't decided yet. Don't even think about leaving. She thought about leaving. She thought about standing up right now, not dramatically, not running, just standing up and picking up her bag and walking to the elevator and down to the lobby and out onto Michigan Avenue, where the February cold would hit her face like clean water and the city would be loud and indifferent and free. She was still thinking about it when the voice came from the table to her left. Excuse me. Quiet, unhurried, not intrusive, more like a door opening just enough to let air through. She turned. The man who had been sitting alone was looking at her directly, not with the performance of concern, not the "oh my goodness, are you all right?" theater of a stranger who wanted credit for noticing. With something much quieter than that. The focused attention of someone who had been watching long enough to have already decided something, and was now extending the decision to her as an option. "I don't mean to intrude," he said. His voice was low, something East Coast in it, old and unhurried. "But I've been sitting here for the better part of an hour." She waited. "I'd like to ask you something," he said. "You don't have to answer it." He held her gaze with the steadiness that was entirely different from Darren's steadiness, and she felt the difference before she could name it. Darren's stillness said, "I am the center of this. Orient yourself accordingly." This man's stillness said something else, something she hadn't encountered in so long it took a moment to recognize. "I'm not going anywhere. Take all the time you need." "Are you here by choice?" he asked. 4 words. 4 small, ordinary words, and they landed in Elena Carter's chest, like a key turning in a lock she had forgotten was there. Not rescue, not salvation, not a man deciding to fix her situation because it offended him. Just a question. An open door. A choice returned to the person it belonged to. She stared at him. "No," she said. The word came out barely above a breath, but it was the most honest sentence she had spoken in months. He nodded once. No drama. No "oh my God," or "I knew it," or any of the noise that would have made this about him. "My name is Adrian," he said. "And if you want to leave, I can help you do that." He paused. "But only if you want to." Mini climax number 9. The 4 words. The key. The choice given back. "Nah, you don't know me," she said. "No. You don't know what this is, what he's like." "I know what I've watched for the past hour," he said. "I know what a man's hand looks like under a table when it's not doing something kind. And I know what a woman's face looks like when she's using everything she has just to stay composed." He paused. "I've seen it before. Someone I couldn't help. A long time ago." Something moved briefly behind his eyes. Not self-pity, not drama, just the weight of a specific memory. "I don't intend to watch it again." She looked at him. "Who are you?" she asked. "Tonight," he said quietly, "I'm the person asking if you want to leave. That's enough." From the corner of her eye movement at the back of the restaurant. Darren. Coming back. The dark suit, the easy stride, the expression already assembling itself, already composing the face he'd wear for the next phase of the evening, whatever that phase was going to be. Elena looked at Adrian. She thought about the blue dress. About, "Don't be late and I'll order for you and I've given you 3 months of patience." About a sister who now believed the wrong story. About 90 days she thought were freedom that turned out to be something else entirely. She looked at this stranger with his silver temples and his patient hands, and the thing behind his eyes that she recognized as loss, real loss, not performed loss. And she said, "Yes, I want to leave." Mini climax number 10. The movement at the back of the restaurant. The choice made before the footsteps arrived. Adrian stood. He did it without urgency, and the absence of urgency was itself the most calming thing she had experienced all evening. He didn't scramble. He didn't signal alarm. He simply rose and said something quietly to the waiter, who appeared how the waiter appeared that quickly she would understand only later, and then he was beside her. "Walk with me," he said. She stood, picked up her bag, took 1 step. "Elena." Darren's voice from across the room, but cutting through the ambient sound of the restaurant like a blade. She took another step. "Elena." Closer now, faster, the pleasantness already fraying at the edges. Darren's hand landed on her shoulder and turned her around with the practiced authority of a man who had done this before and never been stopped. "What are you doing?" he said. Still controlled. Still the voice of a reasonable man at the end of a reasonable dinner. "Where are you going?" She opened her mouth. Before she could speak, Adrian turned. He looked at Darren Mitchell with the same expression he had worn all evening, unhurried, precise, entirely without performance, and he said, "She's leaving." 3 words, delivered with no heat, no challenge, no aggression, just information. The way you'd state a fact about the weather to someone who had asked. Darren looked at him, the quick, calculating look of a man assessing weight and leverage and threat level. His eyes moved from Adrian's face to his suit to his hands. "And who exactly are you?" Darren said pleasantly. "I'm the person she's leaving with," Adrian said. "You don't need more than that tonight." Mini climax number 11. The shoulder. The turn. The 3 words spoken like weather. "Yate." Darren laughed. It was a beautiful laugh. Practiced and warm and edged with fond disbelief, the laugh of a man who found the situation slightly absurd, slightly sad, and was willing to be generous about it anyway. He looked at Elena with an expression of infinite patience. "Elena." His voice was kind. Kind. "Whatever you've told this man, whatever the story is, I think we should handle our private matters privately. Don't you?" "She didn't tell me anything," Adrian said. "I was watching." The laugh stopped. Not gradually. Not with a fade. It stopped the way a light goes out when the power cuts, and what was left in Darren's face was something more honest than anything he'd shown all evening. "You were watching," he repeated. "For about an hour," Adrian said. "You have a way of using your hand under a table that I recognized. The pressure that increases slowly. The way she stopped breathing for a moment when you applied it. The smile she put on to cover it." He said each thing with the unhurried precision of a man reading from notes. "I've seen that technique before." The color in Darren's face changed by 1 degree. "I don't know what you think you saw. I know what I saw," Adrian said. "And I know you're named Darren. I know where you practice law. I know the building on Wacker and the condo on Lake Shore, and the registration of the vehicle you drove tonight." He paused, the briefest, most deliberate pause. "I also know about the incident report from March of last year, filed and then withdrawn, and the one from the year before that, which was handled similarly." Silence. Real silence, the kind that has mass that presses against things. Darren Mitchell was very still. "If you ever contact her again," Adrian said with the same even tone he might use to describe the terms of a real estate contract, "everything I know goes to your managing partner, to the Bar Association, and to the detective who has been following the pattern of those withdrawals for 2 years." He held Darren's gaze without effort. "I have no interest in your career or your reputation. Keep away from her, and I have no reason to revisit any of this. It's simple." Darren opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Elena. She looked back at him. For the first time in 2.5 years, she did not look away first. Mini climax number 12. The files. The pattern. The detective. The gaze she held for the first time. 2 men appeared near the front of the restaurant. They did not rush or announce themselves. They simply materialized in the peripheral vision of everyone at that section of the room. Large, still, immovable, existing in the particular way of men who understand that presence itself communicates everything necessary. Darren looked at them, looked back at Adrian, and Elena watched with a sensation she had no word for yet, as the expression she knew best in the world. The certainty, the ownership, the absolute conviction of a man who believed every room belonged to him, moved across Darren Mitchell's face like a tide going out. What was underneath it was something she had never seen there before. Fear. Not the performed kind. Not the manipulative look, what you've done to me variety he deployed in the aftermath of his own violence. The real, reflexive animal kind, the fear of a person who has suddenly realized they are standing on ground that belongs to someone else entirely. Darren straightened, adjusted his jacket, picked up what remained of his dignity, and there was still some left. She would acknowledge that, and he looked at her one final time. "This isn't over," he said. His voice had lost its warmth. What was underneath the warmth, it turned out, was nothing special. Just a man, just an ordinary man with no warmth left. "Yes," Adrian said quietly, "it is." Darren held her gaze. She held his. She did not flinch, did not look down, did not arrange her face into the practiced blankness she had spent 2 years perfecting. She just looked at him, the blue dress, the careful makeup, the woman who had learned to make herself small enough to survive. And she looked, and she did not look away, until Darren Mitchell turned and walked through the front door of Carmine's restaurant, and the sound of it closing behind him was the most ordinary sound she had ever heard, and the most extraordinary. Mini climax number 13. The tide going out. The fear underneath the certainty. The door. Adrian turned to her. The two men had dissolved. The restaurant breathed around them. Silverware conversation. Someone's anniversary. Someone's beginning the ordinary commerce of a Wednesday night in Chicago. "Are you all right?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know," she said. He nodded, as if "I don't know" were the most reasonable and expected answer in the world. "Can I take you somewhere safe?" he asked. "Somewhere of your choosing. You tell me where." She looked at him, this stranger, this still man, this person who had spent an hour watching and 10 minutes changing the shape of everything without once raising his voice. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do this?" Something moved in his face. Real, unguarded, not performed. Because a long time ago, he said, someone sat across a table from a man like that. And no one asked her if she was there by choice. He paused. "I've had to live with that for a long time." Elena Carter stood in the middle of Carmine's restaurant in her blue dress, and she made a choice, the second free choice she had made in longer than she could remember. "Okay," she said. Outside, the February air hit her face like cold water. The city was loud and indifferent and brilliant and free. And somewhere in the middle of Michigan Avenue, with the wind pulling at her coat and the lights of Chicago running north and south as far as she could see, Elena Carter felt something she hadn't felt in 2.5 years. Not safe. Not yet. Safety would take longer, would cost more, would come in pieces she'd have to earn back slowly. But something small and alive and stubborn as a pilot light in a cold kitchen. The beginning of after. And she walked into it. The car was black. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the make, not the model, just the color, and the fact that it was warm inside and that the leather seat she sank into felt like something she hadn't earned and didn't know what to do with. A driver sat in front without speaking. Adrian sat beside her with 3 inches of space between them. Deliberate space, she realized. Chosen space. The kind a man creates when he wants to make very clear that he is not taking anything. She held her bag in her lap with both hands. Neither of them spoke for almost a full minute, and the silence wasn't uncomfortable the way she expected it to be. It was waiting, patient, like the silence of a room after a long, loud thing has finally stopped. "Where would you like to go?" Adrian asked. "My friend Cassie's place," Elena said. "Winthrop Avenue, Rogers Park." He said the address quietly to the driver without looking it up, without asking her to repeat it. And she filed that away, the easy certainty of a man accustomed to remembering things immediately, and told herself it didn't mean anything yet. The car moved north on Michigan. She looked out the window at the city sliding past. A couple arguing outside a bar. A man walking a dog so large it was nearly walking him. An old woman in a yellow coat standing completely still at a crosswalk, looking at something Elena couldn't see. "You said someone," Elena said suddenly. Adrian turned his head. "Back in the restaurant." She kept her eyes on the window. "You said someone sat across a table from a man like that. And no one asked her if she was there by choice." She paused. Who was she? A beat of silence. "My mother," he said. 1 word. 2 syllables. And the weight they carried told her everything she needed to know about the kind of answer. It was not a performance, not a calculated disclosure designed to make her trust him. Just a fact that still cost something to say out loud. She turned and looked at him properly for the first time. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago," he said. That doesn't always make it smaller. He looked at her. Something shifted slightly in his expression. A fractional adjustment, as if she had said something he hadn't expected from this particular conversation, in this particular car, on this particular night. No, he agreed quietly. It doesn't. Mini climax number 1. The mother. The weight of 2 syllables. The thing that didn't get smaller with time. They drove for a while in the new silence, different from the first one, textured now with what had just been said. Elena's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Darren. Already. The name sitting there like a bruise appearing before the impact. She stared at it through 3 full buzzes and then turned the screen face down against her leg. You don't have to respond to that, Adrian said. He hadn't looked at her phone. He seemed to know anyway. I know, she said. But you want to, he said. Not accusatory, just accurate. She looked at him sharply. Not because I want to talk to him, she said quickly. Because not responding feels like a decision, and every decision right now feels enormous. Adrian nodded slowly. That's a very precise way of describing what control does to a person, he said. It makes the smallest choices feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. She stared at him. You know a lot about this, she said. For someone who just happened to be having dinner alone. He said nothing for a moment. The city kept moving past. I wasn't there by accident, he said finally. The temperature in the car seemed to shift. What? She said. Carmine's tonight. He met her eyes. I wasn't there by coincidence. Mini climax number 2. The admission. The restaurant that wasn't an accident. Then why were you there? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He was quiet for long enough that she started to regret asking, and then he said, I know Darren Mitchell, not personally. Professionally, tangentially. A business matter some months ago. The kind of matter where you see the shape of a man before you see the man himself. He paused. I saw enough of his shape to be concerned, and then, through certain channels, I heard he'd made a reservation, that he'd contacted a woman he'd been asked to stay away from. Certain channels, she repeated. I have people who pay attention to things, he said, simply, without apology. She let that settle. So you were watching over me without telling me? Yes, he said. That should bother me, she said. It probably should, he agreed. I won't argue with that. She looked at him for a long moment. This man with his silver temples and his frank, unhurried honesty about things that most people would have dressed up in better language. It doesn't, she said. And I don't know what that says about me. It says you've spent a long time in a situation where someone monitored you in order to control you, Adrian said. And you can feel the difference between that and this, even if you can't explain it yet. She turned back to the window. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it. Mini climax number 3. The channels. The man who was watching to protect, not to own. Nah. Cassie was awake when they pulled up. She always seemed to be awake, sustained by coffee and the particular restless energy of a woman who worked nights at a hospital and slept in defiant 4-hour chunks. The lights in the second-floor apartment were on. Elena could see the blue flicker of the TV through the curtains. Thank you, she said to Adrian. Her hand was on the door handle. You're welcome. She started to push the door open. Stopped. He's going to call, she said. And text, and probably show up at my school. Yes, Adrian said. He didn't try to soften it. And what you said about the managing partner and the bar association that slows him down, but it doesn't stop him. She turned back. Men like Darren don't stop because they're scared. They get smarter about how they don't stop. Adrian looked at her with an expression that held something close to respect. The specific respect a person shows when someone they thought might be fragile turns out to have clarity instead. You're right, he said. So what actually happens next? She asked. What would you like to happen next? He asked. She almost laughed, not with humor, with the shock of it. Being asked. being asked what she wanted as though the answer were the most natural starting point in the world. "I want it to be actually over," she said. Not quiet for a while. Actually over." "Then I'd like to help with that," Adrian said, "if you'll let me." "Why?" she asked. Again. Because she needed to hear the answer more than once to start believing it. "Because I can," he said. "And because I should have done something like this a long time ago for someone who needed it, and I didn't." He held her gaze. "I'm not collecting a debt. I'm not building one. I just don't want to drive away and find out in 3 months that it wasn't over." She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. "Okay," she said again. It was becoming her word, she realized. The word she said when she had decided to trust something before she fully understood it. She got out of the car. Mini climax number 4. The okay. The trust extended before it was explained. Cassie opened the door before Elena reached the top step. "You're back early?" She stopped, looked past Elena at the black car still idling at the curb, looked at Elena's face. "What happened?" "I left," Elena said. Cassie stared at her. "You left." "I left the dinner. I left him." Elena stepped inside. Her voice was calm in the way that things are calm right before they stop being calm. "I told him I wasn't coming back." "Elena." Cassie gripped at her arms. "Are you okay? Did he do something? He was—" She stopped. "How did you explain it? That nothing had happened that would photograph as violence, that a man could sit across a candlelit table and dismantle you with the precision of someone who had been practicing for years and leave no visible mark." "He was Darren," she said finally. "He was completely exactly Darren." Cassie understood that. She had learned to understand that. She pulled Elena into the apartment, sat her on the couch, and put the kettle on, with the efficiency of a woman who knew that tea was insufficient and made it anyway, because insufficient was better than nothing. "The car," Cassie said from the kitchen. "Who was in the car?" Elena looked down at her hands. "Someone who helped me leave." "Someone you know." "Not before tonight." A pause from the kitchen, the sound of mugs being taken down. "Elena." "I know how it sounds." "It sounds like you got into a car with a stranger after a dinner that scared you." "I know." "That is not a great sequence of events." "I know, Cassie." Elena looked up. "But I'm here. And the only person I was actually afraid of tonight is not in this apartment." Cassie came back in with 2 mugs and the expression of a woman running a rapid internal calculation between friend who is worried and friend who understands that sometimes the stranger in the car is the safer option. She sat down, handed Elena a mug. "Tell me everything." Mini climax number 5. The telling. The kitchen. The friend who understood. She told her most of it. Not everything. There were parts that still didn't have language yet, parts that were still too raw and too close to be shaped into sentences without breaking, but she told her enough. Carmine's. The wrist under the table. The whisper. Adrian's question. The 2 men who appeared. Darren's face when the warmth ran out. Cassie listened without interrupting, which was one of her great gifts. She sat with her mug in both hands and her feet pulled up under her, and she listened with the total, unperforming attention of someone who understood that the most important thing right now was not to have a response ready, but just to receive what was being said. When Elena finished, Cassie was quiet for a moment. "He knew about me," Cassie said. "Darren, he knew you were here. My sister told him," Elena said. "He ran into her, or found her, I don't know which." Cassie set down her mug very carefully. "Your sister needs to know what she's dealing with." "I know. She thinks he's what a worried boyfriend. He told her we were working through things, that I was struggling." Elena's voice was flat. "He's been building the story for 3 months. While I thought I was free, he was out there." She stopped. The word she needed was constructing. He had been constructing her. the version of Elena that fit the story he needed to tell. "He's very good at it," she said. "So is the man in the black car," Cassie said. Elena looked at her. "I'm just saying." Cassie held up a hand. "One man who controls information to hurt you. One man who controls information to help you. They're both men who control information, Elena." It was a fair thing to say. Elena had thought something adjacent to it herself in the car when Adrian said certain channels. She had felt the similarity the way you feel a loose tooth. You know it's there, you have to decide what to do with it. "He gave me the choice to leave," Elena said. "Every single time he gave me the choice." Cassie considered this. "That's the difference," she said finally. "Isn't it?" "Yeah," Elena said softly. "That's the difference." Mini climax number 6. Cassie's challenge. The comparison. The difference that mattered. She didn't sleep until after 3 in the morning. She lay in Cassie's narrow guest room, with the cat from the radiator now installed on her feet, and her phone on the nightstand face up, because she had deliberately decided to stop hiding from the fact of Darren's messages. There were 9 of them by midnight. She read them in order. The first 3 were in the register he always used immediately after a confrontation measured reasonable, the voice of a man being very patient with an unreasonable situation. Elena. "I think we should talk about what happened tonight. That man had no business interfering in something he doesn't understand. I'm not angry. I just want to talk." The fourth one was slightly different. "I need you to understand that what he told you about those reports is not accurate. There's context that he doesn't have." The fifth. "Who is he? Do you know who that man actually is? I think you should ask yourself that question." The 6th through 8th escalated so gradually she almost missed the change, almost but not quite. The careful removal of the word please. The shift from "I want to talk" to "we need to talk." The appearance of her sister's name in the 8th message, just her name with no sentence around it. Just the name. The way you put a piece on a board. The 9th message was a photograph of Cassie's building, taken tonight. She could tell by the angle and the light, the street lamp on Winthrop Avenue casting the same shadow she'd seen from the car when they pulled up. He knew where she was. He had known before she arrived. She sat up in the dark with the phone in her hand and the cat lifting its head from her feet in mild feline annoyance, and she understood with a cold absolute clarity that tonight had not been an ending. It had been a declaration. Mini climax number 7. The 9th message. The photograph. The declaration. She called Adrian at 1:17 in the morning. She had his number because he'd written it on the back of a card and given it to her when she got out of the car, saying only if you need anything tonight. She had put it in her bag without comment and told herself she wouldn't use it. He answered on the 2nd ring. Not groggy. Alert, the alertness of someone who had not been asleep. "He sent me a photo," she said without preamble. "Of Cassie's building. Tonight. After the dinner." A beat of silence. Then, "Send it to me." She did. She heard him look at it. Not a sound exactly, more an absence of sound, a brief stillness on the other end of the line while he processed. "He was having you followed," Adrian said. "Before tonight." "That's what the photo means." "That photo was taken approximately 40 minutes before you arrived," he said. "He knew where you'd go when you left the restaurant. He needed you to know that he knew." He paused. "It's a message." "I know it's a message," she said. "I've been receiving his messages for 2.5 years. I know what they mean." "I know you do." His voice was steady and quiet. "I'm not explaining it to you. I'm thinking out loud with you. There's a difference." She almost smiled. Not with happiness, with the strange, unexpected sensation of being spoken to, as though she were a thinking person, rather than a situation to be managed. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No," Adrian agreed. "Not on his own." "So what do we do?" She heard him exhale. Not with frustration, not with drama. Just the sound of a man settling into a problem, The way you settle into work, you know, will take time and skill. Tomorrow morning, he said. Can you meet me? There are some people I'd like you to speak with. A lawyer, not someone from his world, someone from mine. And a contact I have with the Chicago PD who has been building a separate case involving those incident reports. She went still. A case. Darren's pattern didn't start with you, Adrian said carefully. And it didn't stop. The woman before you filed a report. She withdrew it, you know how that goes. But the detective kept the file open. He's been waiting for something like tonight. Something like a witness, Adrian said. Someone who will not withdraw. She sat in the dark guest room, with the cat now standing on her chest, with the unreasonable confidence of cats everywhere, and she felt the shape of the thing Adrian was offering her. Not protection exactly, not rescue. Something more durable than either. Agency. The opportunity to be the person who didn't withdraw. Mini climax. Number 8. The case. The woman before her. The word witness. She met him at 9 the next morning at a building on South LaSalle Street. Not his office, it turned out, but a law firm on the 14th floor, where a woman named Margaret Cho met them in a conference room with coffee and a legal pad, and the particular efficient warmth of someone who was both genuinely kind and genuinely dangerous in a courtroom. Margaret was in her late 50s, Elena guessed. Silver-streaked hair, a blazer the color of good red wine. She had the manner of a woman who had heard 1,000 stories like Elena's and had never once stopped being angry about them. I've reviewed what Adrian sent me this morning, Margaret said, setting down her pen. The messages, the photograph, the incident reports from the prior cases. She folded her hands. Here's what I can tell you. What happened last night at that restaurant was documented. The waiter who served your table has already given a statement to my investigator. Darren's behavior there is consistent with the prior pattern, and it is prosecutable. The photograph he sent you last night is under current Illinois statute criminal surveillance and intimidation. We can move on that today if you want to. Elena looked at her. Today, Margaret said. Within the hour if you say yes. Elena looked at Adrian. He was looking at Margaret, not at her deliberately. She understood, giving her the space to make this decision without his face in it. She looked back at Margaret. What does yes mean? Elena asked. Specifically, what does it look like? It means a temporary protective order filed before noon, Margaret said. It means the photograph and the messages go into evidence. It means the detective I've already spoken to this morning pays Darren Mitchell a visit today, not tomorrow, not next week, and makes it very clear that the Bar Association file has been opened. It means he understands concretely and immediately that the architecture he spent 3 months building is now evidence against him rather than protection. Elena thought about the blue dress still in her bag. She thought about the wrist under the table. She thought about 1.5 years of small calculations, which color, which silence, which smile. She thought about her sister saying, I've been worried about you. You've been distant, and not knowing it was Darren's sentence coming out of her sister's mouth. Yes, she said. Mini climax number 9. Margaret. The hour. The yes that moved immediately. The protective order was filed at 11:43 a.m. She knew the exact time because Margaret showed her the timestamp on the filing confirmation and said with the matter-of-fact satisfaction of a woman who liked precision, He'll be served this afternoon. Elena sat with that for a moment. The specific concrete reality of, he will be served this afternoon. Not someday things will get better. Not, I hope he leaves me alone. An actual document with an actual timestamp being delivered by an actual human being to Darren Mitchell's actual address today. She had spent 2.5 years in a world where his power felt absolute and her options felt theoretical. This was not theoretical. On the cab ride back to Cassie's, she called her sister. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She called again. This time, her sister picked up on the second ring voice, thick with the particular anxiety of someone who had been awake deciding whether to answer. "Elena, I was going to call you. Darren told me." "I know what Darren told you," Elena said. Her voice was calm and sure, in a way that surprised even her. "I need you to listen to me. Not to him, to me. Can you do that?" Silence. "Yes," her sister said in a small voice. "His name is Darren Mitchell, and he is a man who puts his hands on women and then makes them disappear the reports afterward," Elena said. "What happened to me in the last 2.5 years is not me going through something. It is me surviving something. And I need you to know the difference, because he is going to call you today or tomorrow, and he is going to tell you a story, and I need you to have heard mine first." Her sister was crying before she finished the sentence. Not the crying of someone learning something new. The crying of someone whose fear that they already knew was just confirmed. "Elena." "I'm okay," Elena said. And for the first time in a very long time, the sentence didn't feel like a practiced lie. "I'm actually okay, but I need you on my side." "I'm always on your side," her sister said. "I'm always got Elena. Why didn't you?" "Because I couldn't," she said simply. "And now I can." Mini climax number 10. The sister. The story told first. The "I'm actually okay." Darren was served the protective order at 3:18 in the afternoon. She knew this because Adrian texted her 3:18 p.m. Confirmed served. Detective Chen was present. She was back in her classroom by then. She had gone in for the afternoon session because she needed something ordinary, something that belonged entirely to her and had nothing to do with any of this. Her students were doing math centers, small heads bent over worksheets, the room full of the particular focused industry of 8-year-olds who had not yet learned to be self-conscious about effort. She sat at her desk and read the text and felt something she couldn't name sit down in her chest and quietly unpack itself. Patricia appeared in the doorway at the end of the day after the last child had gone and looked at her with the question already in her eyes. "I texted you last night," Patricia said. "When you didn't text me back, I know, I'm sorry." Elena looked up from the text. "I'm okay, I got out." Patricia crossed the room and sat on the edge of the nearest student desk. An absurd thing a grown woman sitting on a tiny desk meant for an 8-year-old, but she did it without hesitation, and the absurdity of it made Elena love her. "Out, out," Patricia said. "Out, out." Elena confirmed. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through her face. Relief, anger, the complicated mixture that you felt when someone you'd been worried about longer than they knew was finally safe. "Good," Patricia said. "Just that." "Good." Elena nodded. "There's going to be more," Elena said. It's not finished. There's going to be a legal process, and he's going to try things, and it's going to be—" "I know," Patricia said. "I know how these things go." She paused. "You have people." Elena thought about Adrian in the black car, Margaret with her red blazer and her legal pad, Cassie with her tea and her honest questions, her sister who was crying on the phone and saying, "I'm always on your side." "Yeah," Elena said. "I have people." Patricia nodded once firmly, as if that settled something. "Then you're going to be okay," she said. And the particular quality of those words. Not "I hope" or "probably," but just the flat declarative. "You're going to be okay," the way you'd state a fact about the weather, landed somewhere in Elena Carter's chest and stayed there. Mini climax number 11. Patricia, the good, the people. That night, for the first time in over 2 years, Elena Carter fell asleep before midnight. No rehearsal, no calculation, no lying awake running probability assessments on what the next day would bring, what mood he would be, and what small thing she might have done that would require management tomorrow. She fell asleep on Cassie's couch with the cat installed on her feet and the TV murmuring low, and her phone face up on the cushion beside her, showing no new messages from Darren Mitchell, because Darren Mitchell had been visited by a detective and served with a court order, and had spent the afternoon, according to a text from Margaret at 7 p.m., in a very quiet conversation with his managing partner. She fell asleep in the middle of a thought she couldn't quite finish. And when she woke at 6 the next morning to the sound of Cassie's alarm going off in the bedroom and the cat jumping off her feet in offended dignity, the thought was still there, half-formed, but solid enough to hold. I didn't wait for someone to save me, she thought. I said yes to a question. That's all. I said yes, and all of this came from that. She sat up. The apartment was quiet and warm, and entirely hers for these few minutes before the day started. She picked up her phone. There was a message from Adrian sent at 6:02 a.m. Detective Chen is moving forward with the prior case. He'd like to speak with you when you're ready. No urgency, your timeline. Your timeline. 2 words that had never belonged to her before. She held the phone in both hands, the early light coming in through Cassie's curtains, the city outside beginning its ordinary, enormous day. She typed back, I'm ready. And for the first time in a very long time, it was true. Detective Ray Chen was not what she expected. She had built a version of him in her head on the drive over the composite image assembled from years of television and the particular anxiety of a woman who had spent 2 years avoiding exactly this kind of conversation. She expected someone tired, someone with a desk covered in files, and a voice that said, I've heard this before, even when it was trying not to. Ray Chen was 40, maybe 42, with a calm face and the unhurried manner of a man who had learned that rushing people who were trying to tell the truth was the fastest way to lose it. He met her in a conference room at the district office. Not an interrogation room, she noticed, and filed that away as deliberate with 2 cups of coffee already on the table and a legal pad he didn't open for the first 10 minutes. I want to start, he said, by telling you what I already know. So you understand you're not here to convince me of anything. She looked at him. I've had a file on Darren Mitchell for 14 months, he said. The incident report from March of last year. The one that was withdrawn came from a woman named Sandra Park. 31 years old, paralegal at a firm 2 blocks from his. She withdrew it 6 days after filing because someone called her employer and suggested her professional judgment was in question. She still has the voicemail. He paused. The one from 2 years before came from a woman in his building. She withdrew after her lease was mysteriously not renewed and she had to move. Another pause. I've been waiting for someone who wouldn't withdraw. Elena sat with that. And you think that's me, she said. I think you're the first person who came to me with a lawyer already in place and a protective order already filed before we even sat down, he said. So yes, I think that might be you. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Tell me what you need, she said. Mini climax number 1, the 14 months. Sandra Park. The voicemail that still existed. She talked for 2 hours. Not crying, she had expected to cry and didn't, which surprised her. She talked with the flat, methodical precision of someone who had spent a long time organizing the truth inside her own head, and was now for the first time being asked to say it out loud to someone with a legal pad and the authority to do something with it. She told him about the first time, not the bruise, not the incident that most people would mark as the beginning, but the thing that came before it. The first time he had taken her phone while she was sleeping and gone through it, and then, in the morning, mentioned a text from a male colleague in the passing offhand way of a man showing you he could see everything. She had explained it to herself then as jealousy, as love in an untrained form. She had explained it to herself as a lot of things before she ran out of explanations. Chen wrote steadily. He didn't look up to react. He didn't flinch or make sounds of sympathy that would have broken her rhythm. He just wrote, and the scratching of the pen on the legal pad became a kind of anchor, the sound of her story becoming something solid, something that existed outside her own memory, where it had lived alone for too long. When she finished, he put the pen down. The photograph he sent you, he said. The one of your friend's building. Yes. That photograph was taken by someone he hired, Chen said. Not by Darren himself. We traced the phone the image was sent from, to a prepaid, registered to a man who does occasional work for two different investigators Darren has used before. He looked at her steadily. He had surveillance on you before the dinner, Elena. He knew where you'd go if you left. The dinner wasn't an attempt to win you back. She looked at him. It was an audition, Chen said. He was showing you what he knew, testing whether the surveillance alone would be enough to bring you back in line without him having to do anything more visible. The room was very quiet. He's done this before, she said. It was not a question. With Sandra Park, Chen said, there was a similar sequence. Dinner. A demonstration of how much he knew. Withdrawal followed. He paused. He's refined the approach. Elena thought about the blue dress, about the calculation she'd made putting it on which color bought her a quieter evening. She had thought she was managing him. She had thought her small accommodations were giving her some measure of control. He had been 3 steps ahead of every one of them. Mini-climax number 2. The surveillance before the dinner. The audition. 3 steps ahead. She called Adrian from the parking lot. Chen told me about the investigator, she said. The surveillance. I know, Adrian said. He called me this morning. You knew before I walked in there. Yes. She stood in the cold with her coat open because she'd forgotten to button it, and the air felt necessary, the specific sharpness of February air that made it easier to think. Why didn't you tell me last night? She asked. Because... Adrian said carefully, you needed to hear it from someone with a badge and a case file, not from me. You've spent 2 years with a man who decided what information you got and when you got it. I didn't want to repeat that structure even in a way that was trying to help. She stood very still. She thought about that. Really thought about it. The intention underneath it, the specific intelligence required to understand that the way you helped someone out of a control pattern mattered as much as the help itself. That's... She stopped, started again. Most people wouldn't have thought of that. I had a good reason to think of it, he said. His mother. She remembered, the weight of 2 syllables. Okay, she said. 3rd time she'd said that word to him. It was still becoming hers, still the word she used when she had decided to trust something true. Mini-climax number 3. The structure of help. The reason he thought of it. The managing partner's name was William Farley, and he had been practicing real estate law in Chicago for 31 years, with the careful, methodical respectability of a man who considered his firm's reputation a living thing that required daily maintenance. She knew this because Margaret told her 3 days after the filing that Farley had called her directly. He wants a meeting, Margaret said across the desk in her office with the measured tone of someone presenting information without preloading it with conclusions. Ostensibly to discuss the matter privately before it becomes public record. Off the books, he said. What does that mean? Elena asked. It means he's scared, Margaret said. Darren is a junior partner. He's been at the firm 4 years. If the Bar Association opens a formal inquiry and Chen's file makes that very likely, the firm's name is in the room. Farley knows that. He's trying to get ahead of it. And you think I should meet with him? I think, Margaret said carefully, that you should understand what you'd be walking into. Farley is not your ally. He is a man protecting an institution. That is different from a man protecting you. In that meeting, your interests and his interests may briefly overlap, and we can use that overlap. But the moment they stop overlapping, he will prioritize the institution. She paused. I'll be there with you. The meeting is on our terms or it doesn't happen. Elena nodded slowly. Set it up. Margaret looked at her for a moment, with an expression Elena was learning to recognize the particular look of someone watching a person discover the boundaries of their own capability. You're handling this very well, Margaret said. Not warmly, professionally, which from Margaret was worth considerably more. I'm terrified, Elena said honestly. Good, Margaret said. Terrified people make careful decisions. It's the people who aren't scared that make mistakes. Mini climax number 4. Farley. The institution protecting itself. The useful overlap. The meeting with Farley happened on a Thursday morning in a conference room that cost more per square foot than Elena's apartment. Farley was 63, silver-haired, with the particular groomed solidity of a man who had spent decades making difficult things look comfortable. He came with a lawyer of his own, a young woman named Davis, who took notes with a focused efficiency that reminded Elena with a sharp, unexpected pang of herself putting on the blue dress. Preparation as defense. Farley opened with sympathy. He was good at it. Genuine seeming calibrated the sympathy of a man who had probably delivered bad news to clients for 30 years and had learned the tone that made it land softer. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I want to begin by saying that nothing I've learned in the past 72 hours reflects the firm's values or the standards we hold our people to." "I appreciate that," Elena said. Margaret had prepped her for this sentence, and she delivered it exactly as instructed, neutral receiving, giving nothing. "We take these matters extremely seriously," Farley continued, "and I want you to know that the firm is prepared to cooperate fully with any legitimate investigative process." "That's very reassuring," Margaret said in a tone that indicated it was not. "Now you requested this meeting, Mr. Farley. We're here. What specifically are you proposing?" A brief recalibration behind his eyes. He had expected this to go differently, slower probably, more deferential. "The firm," he said carefully, "would like to discuss the possibility of a civil resolution that compensates Ms. Carter for her experience in exchange for—" "No," Elena said. Farley stopped. Margaret looked at her not with surprise, but with the focused attention of a lawyer recalibrating to her client's lead. "No settlement," Elena said. "No private resolution, no quiet compensation in exchange for making this smaller than it is." She looked at Farley with the steadiness she had been practicing all her life for a different reason. "I'm not here to make this easier for the firm. I'm here because 2 women before me tried to tell the truth and were made to withdraw it. I'm not withdrawing." The room was very quiet. Farley looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face, not anger, not contempt. Something closer to recognition. The look of a man recalculating who he was actually dealing with. "I understand," he said quietly. "Good," Elena said. Mini climax number 5. The no. The 2 women before her. The recalculation in Farley's eyes. She did not expect what happened next. 3 days after the meeting with Farley, Margaret called her at 7 in the morning before school, while Elena was standing in Cassie's kitchen, eating toast she wasn't tasting. "Darren resigned from the firm last night," Margaret said. Elena set down her toast. "Effective immediately, no statement. Personal reasons, the filing says." A pause. "Elena, he also violated the protective order." She gripped the counter. "What?" "He sent a message to your sister last night. Not to you, to your sister. On her personal phone. The message contained details about your current address and a suggestion that you were, quote, not in a stable mental state and might benefit from family intervention." The cold clarity again. The same cold clarity from the night of the photograph, the recognition of a man who had not stopped but had simply changed instruments. "He's trying to get to me through her," Elena said. "Yes, and the message to her constitutes indirect contact under the order. Chen is filing a violation this morning." Margaret paused. "There's something else. Sandra Park called me last night." Elena went still. "Sandra Park. She heard through a contact that you'd filed, that you weren't withdrawing." Another pause, and this one had weight in it. "She wants to add her statement to the record. She was waiting, Elena. She was waiting for someone to go first." The toast on the counter. The early light in Cassie's kitchen. The cat sitting on the chair watching her with the regal indifference of a creature for whom human drama was mildly interesting at best. Elena felt the shape of the thing Sandra Park had just handed her. Not just a legal case. A line of women, each one waiting for the one before her to stand up first. and she had stood up first. Mini climax number 6. Sandra Park calling. The line of women. The one who stood up first. She told Adrian that night. They had developed over the 10 days since the dinner at Carmine's, a kind of evening practice, not romantic, not yet anything with a name, just a phone call, usually around 8 or 9, that had started as logistical updates and had slowly, without either of them making a decision about it, become something else. A conversation. The kind where you stopped editing yourself midway through a sentence because you had started to trust the other end of the line. Sandra Park is testifying, she said. I know, he said. Chen told me. He tells you a lot. We've worked together before, Adrian said, on other cases. She processed this. The landscape of Adrian Moretti was still largely unmapped. She knew the edges, knew the texture of him in conversation, knew the thing behind his eyes when he spoke about his mother. But the full geography was still forming, and every conversation added a new contour. What do you actually do? She asked. It was the most direct she had been about it. A beat of silence. Legitimate businesses mostly, he said. Real estate development, some private investment. I have connections that aren't always tidy, but I don't do things that would embarrass you if they came out. That's a very specific way to define ethical, she said. It's an honest one, he said. She thought about that. About the difference between a lie that protects and a truth that doesn't flatter but stays in the room with you. I appreciate the honesty, she said. I know you do, he said. It's one of the things. He stopped. She waited. One of the things I notice about you, he finished. Quiet, not pressed. She let it sit there between them on the phone line, this small, careful thing he had started to say and then pulled back from. She didn't push it. She was learning that some things needed the space to arrive at their own pace. Get some sleep, she said. You too, he said. She hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of Cassie's guest room, and she thought about the specific texture of a man who stopped mid-sentence because he was being careful with you. Mini climax number 7. The unmapped geography. The honest definition of ethical. The sentence he stopped. The Bar Association opened a formal inquiry 11 days after the filing. Elena knew because Margaret sent her a one-line text at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon. Formal inquiry opened. Official. This is real now. She was in the middle of leading her class through a read aloud when the text came. She felt the buzz in her pocket and kept reading because her students were leaning forward over their desks in the particular suspended way that meant the story had them, and she was not going to break that for anything. She kept reading for 7 more minutes until the chapter ended, and the children broke into the spontaneous, messy discussion that was her favorite sound in the world. And then she stepped into the hallway for 30 seconds and read the text, and felt her chest expand with something she couldn't name, and then walked back in and kept teaching. It was Patricia who noticed. After school, lingering in the doorway, the way she had started to linger since the night of the dinner, Patricia looked at her and said, "You look different today." "Do I?" "Like something shifted." Elena thought about how to say it. "The Bar Association opened an inquiry today," she said. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means," Elena said, "that the institution that gave him his credibility is now the one questioning it." She paused. He used the firm and the title and the respectability like a second set of hands, something to hold me still with while he did everything else. And now those same hands are being examined. Patricia nodded slowly. "Good," she said. Again. Just that word. But this time it landed differently, heavier, more final, the way good sounds when it means justice, rather than just okay. Mini climax number 8. The Bar Association. The second set of hands. The good that meant justice. Uek. Darren called her sister twice more that week. Elena knew because her sister called her after each one. Something that would not have happened 3 weeks ago. something that was new and fragile and felt like the cautious reopening of a door that had been quietly closed for longer than either of them had fully acknowledged. The first call her sister reported had been the reasonable version. He missed Elena. He was worried about her. He thought she was being influenced by people who didn't have her best interests at heart. He'd mentioned Adrian by name, not with information, but with the particular insinuation of a man planting a seed he hoped would grow in the dark. He said Adrian Moretti is dangerous, her sister told her. He said I should be worried about who Elena is, who you're spending time with. What did you say? Elena asked. I said I'd look into it, her sister said. And then I called you. Elena felt a pull in her chest, the slow healing pull of trust, being rebuilt in the specific direction of someone she loved. Thank you, she said. He called again last night, her sister said. Different register. Not reasonable anymore. A pause. He said that you'd made a serious mistake, and that he was a patient man, but patience had limits. She stopped. Elena, I'm scared. I know, Elena said. Call Chen directly. I'm going to text you his number right now. Both of those calls are violations, and Chen needs to know the exact wording. She heard her sister's breath catch. You're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong, but I need you to help me build the record. Okay, her sister said. Small, frightened, but present. And Elena, for the first time since any of this began, heard her own word. Her word, the one she used when she chose to trust something coming back to her from someone she loved. Mini climax number 9. The 2 violations. The sister's okay. The word coming back. The second violation filed against Darren Chen's notation of the indirect contacts through her sister triggered something Elena hadn't anticipated. Darren's attorney reached out to Margaret. Not Farley's firm. A different lawyer entirely, a criminal defense attorney named Hargrove, whose name Margaret told her with a carefully neutral expression appeared on the kind of cases that required a specific and expensive skill set. He's retained criminal defense, Elena said. Yes. That means he knows the violation isn't civil anymore. Yes, Margaret said again. It also means he's had a conversation with someone who told him the bar inquiry plus Chen's file plus the second violation changes the math significantly. She paused. Elena Hargrove called to discuss terms. Terms for what? His cooperation with the Bar Association's process in exchange for a structured agreement on the criminal matter. Margaret looked at her steadily. In plain language, Darren is considering whether to get ahead of this by cooperating in exchange for controlling what the outcome looks like. Elena felt the old fear flicker, the reflex still alive somewhere in the muscle memory of 2.5 years. The idea that this was still negotiable, that there was still a version of this where he emerged intact. What does his cooperation mean for Sandra Park? She asked. For the other women. Margaret looked at her with the focused respect that was her version of warmth. Nothing, she said. Their cases proceed regardless of what he does. His cooperation, if it happens, affects his own sentencing and bar outcome. It does not close any of the civil matters. Then let him cooperate, Elena said. I don't need to control what happens to him. I just need it to happen. Margaret wrote something on her legal pad. You're sure, she said. I'm sure, Elena said. I spent 2 years needing to survive him. I don't need to defeat him. I just need him to be held accountable by something bigger than my silence. Mini climax number 10. Hargrove. The criminal defense. The bigger than my silence. That night she called Adrian. He picked up on the first ring, which she had noticed he always did. Now always the first ring, as if the phone were already in his hand. Hargrove called Margaret, she said. I know, he said. She told me. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you funded the legal costs. It was not a question. She had been adding things up for the past 48 hours, the speed of Margaret's engagement, the depth of Chen's file, the investigator who had traced the photograph within 12 hours. None of it happened at the speed of a system working on its own. Someone had been accelerating it. A pause on the other end of the line. "Yes," Adrian said, without telling me. "Yes, Adrian," she kept her voice even. "We talked about this, about the structure of how help is given." "I know," he said, and his voice carried something real, not defensive, not rationalizing, actually accountable. "I told myself it was logistical, that you didn't need to know the mechanism, just the outcome." A pause. "That was wrong. I'm sorry." She sat with that. The specific texture of a genuine apology, no qualification, no pivot to how much he'd been trying to help. Just the acknowledgement. "I needed to know," she said. "You're right," he said. "You deserve to know." "Don't do it again," she said. "Whatever you do from here, I know about it first." "Agreed." "Agreed," he said. No hesitation. She exhaled. "Thank you for paying it," she said. "I mean that. And I'm going to pay you back." "Elena, I'm going to pay you back," she said again. Firm. Not angry, just certain. "Because I need this to be mine. I need the story of what happened to be that I did it with, help with a lot of help, but that I did it. Not that someone did it for me." Silence on the line. "Okay," Adrian said, her word, in his voice. And the particular quality of it, the specific unhurried respect, made something in her chest settle into place, like a key finding its lock. Mini climax number 11. The funding revealed. The apology without qualification. Her word in his mouth. Sandra Park called her directly 2 days later. She had expected she didn't know what she had expected. A stranger's voice. Someone careful and distant, the emotional equivalent of a legal document. What she got was a woman who laughed at herself within the first 2 minutes of the call and said, "I'm going to say something real to you, and I hope it's okay." And then said, "I thought about calling the detective for 14 months. Every time I picked up the phone, I thought, what if she says no? What if I'm the only one and I can't hold it up alone?" Elena understood this so precisely and so physically it was almost dizzying. "I know," she said. "I watched the filing come through. Margaret posted the docket number, and I sat in my car in a parking garage for 20 minutes just crying," Sandra said. "Because someone went first. You went first. And I could finally make the call I'd been trying to make for over a year." Elena closed her eyes. She thought about the night she left Darren's apartment with the bag packed and her hands shaking. She had done that for herself. She had done it just to survive. She had not known there was a line of women behind her, each one waiting for someone to stand up and stay standing. "Are you scared?" Elena asked her. "Terrified," Sandra said. "Are you?" "Every day," Elena said. "But I have good people around me." "Margaret's the best," Sandra said warmly. "She is." Elena paused. "And there may be others who come forward. When you testify, when people hear you, there may be others." "I know," Sandra said quietly. "That's why I'm doing it." A pause. 14 months I waited for someone to go first. I don't want another woman to wait 14 months for me." Elena opened her eyes. Outside Cassie's window, Chicago was doing what Chicago always did, enormous and indifferent, and full of a million people navigating their own private wars. She had been one of them, invisible for 2.5 years. She wasn't invisible anymore. "We'll do it together," Elena said. And Sandra Park said simply, "Yes." Mini climax. Number 12. Sandra. The 14 months of waiting. Together. Three weeks to the day from the dinner at Carmine's, Elena moved into a new apartment. Not the one Adrian had originally arranged. She had declined that politely, but absolutely on the grounds that she needed her own address, chosen by her, paid for by her. Margaret had connected her with a building on the north side where the super changed the locks on move-in day as a standard practice, and the lease was in her name alone. She moved in on a Saturday with Cassie and her sister. And there was a moment in the middle of the afternoon, boxes half unpacked, everyone eating pizza on the floor, because there was no furniture yet, when her sister looked at her across the mess and said, "You look like yourself." Elena looked back at her. "I think I am," she said. "I'm getting there." Her sister reached across a pizza box and squeezed her hand. Elena squeezed back. That evening, after Cassie and her sister had gone, she sat alone in the middle of the empty living room with a cup of tea going cold beside her and her phone in her lap. She thought about 2.5 years, about the blue dress, about the wrist under the table, and the whisper, and the photograph, and the 9 text messages in escalating order. About Sandra Park crying in a parking garage for 20 minutes. About a detective who had kept a file open for 14 months because he believed something was coming. About a man at the next table who had asked a question instead of making a decision. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Adrian. "I'm in. First night in my own place. Thank you for the question. Not the help. The question." She set the phone down. 3 minutes later it buzzed. "That question was always yours," he wrote. "I just asked it out loud." She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the floor beside her. T leaned her head back against the wall and felt not safety, not yet, not completely, but the ground. The ground beneath her feet, solid and hers and chosen. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. The first time she laughed, really laughed, the unguarded kind, that came from somewhere below the ribcage, was on a Tuesday morning in late March, 6 weeks after Carmine's. One of her students, a boy named Marcus, who had a gift for delivering observations at the worst possible moment, had looked up from his reading worksheet and announced to the entire class that the main character's dog reminded him of his uncle because they both smelled like cheese and refused to listen. The class exploded. Elena tried to hold her teacher face together for approximately 4 seconds and then gave up entirely, laughing with them, and the sound that came out of her was so unfamiliar in her own ears that it startled her. Patricia, passing in the hallway, stopped in the doorway and looked in. She caught Elena's eye, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, simple and complete, and then Patricia kept walking. That night, Elena sat with the memory of the laugh, the way you sit with something you found after a long search, carefully not wanting to break it. She had not known how long it had been since she'd laughed like that. Long enough that the sound had felt like a stranger's voice coming out of her own body. She called Adrian and told him about Marcus and the uncle and the cheese. And Adrian laughed, not the polished, socially appropriate laugh of a man performing good humor, but something real and sudden that he seemed mildly surprised by himself. "I didn't know you laughed like that," she said. "Like what?" "Like a normal person," she said. "You're very composed generally. It's slightly unnerving." A beat of silence, and then he said, "Most people find it reassuring. Most people haven't watched you dismantle someone over a dinner table," she said. "Once you've seen that version, the composure reads differently." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that a bad thing?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "It just means I see more of you than most people do, I think." Another pause, longer this time. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you do." She hung up 20 minutes later and sat in her new apartment, still sparse, still the apartment of someone who was building a life from scratch rather than inheriting one, and felt the laugh from that morning still somewhere in her chest, like a coal that hadn't gone cold yet. Mini climax number 1. The first real laugh. The coal that hadn't gone cold. Again, the Bar Association hearing was scheduled for the second week of April. Margaret walked her through it twice, once in her office with the legal pad and the precise, efficient language of preparation, and once over coffee in a place near Elena's school where the booths were vinyl and the noise level made privacy easy. "It's not a trial," Margaret said. "It's a disciplinary proceeding. The standard of evidence is different. You're not proving beyond reasonable doubt, you're establishing a preponderance. The pattern matters as much as the individual incidents." "And Sandra Park testifies too." "Sandra testifies, yes. And there's a third woman." Margaret said it without preamble, watching Elena's face. Elena went still. A third. Her name is Vivian Torres. She worked in his building 3 years ago. Not a formal complaint, she never filed, but she spoke to the investigator last week after Sandra's name became public record. Margaret paused. She has photographs. Of what? Of bruising, Margaret said quietly. She'd sent them to a friend at the time. The friend still had them in her phone 3 years later. Elena sat with the specific weight of that, a woman sending photographs of her own bruises to a friend because she didn't know what else to do with the evidence of what was happening to her. Documenting it the way you'd document something you wanted to remember, or couldn't afford to forget, or needed someone else to know about in case. In case. 3 of us, Elena said. 3 of you, Margaret confirmed. And you think the pattern, Margaret said, is the case. Each woman alone is a story he can contest. 3 women with consistent documentation, a consistent timeline, a consistent methodology. That is not a story anymore. That is a record. Elena looked at her coffee cup. He did this 3 times, she said. That I know of. That we found. Yes, Margaret said. And every time he found a way to make the woman disappear back into silence. Yes. Until now. Margaret looked at her with the focused, unornamented respect that was her highest register. Until now, she said. Mini-climax number 2. Vivian Torres, the photographs. 3 women and a record. Roma. She met Vivian the week before the hearing. Margaret arranged it a coffee, not a legal meeting, just 3 women in a booth in the same vinyl-seated place where Elena and Margaret had talked, which Elena suspected was deliberate on Margaret's part. The familiar space, a kindness. Vivian was 34, small, with the watchful eyes of someone who had trained herself to assess rooms quickly. She arrived first and chose the booth facing the door, and Elena recognized the choice immediately and completely, the instinct of a person who needed to see what was coming. They sat for a moment with their coffees and the particular charged silence of people who share something enormous and have not yet figured out how to begin saying so. Sandra spoke first. I keep thinking about the timeline, she said. Me in 2022, Vivian in 2021, Elena in 2023. He just kept going. Every time one of us got out, he found someone new. He refined it, Elena said. Chen told me that. He called it refining, like the method improved with practice. Vivian made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. That's a clinical way to describe what he did to us. Yes, Elena said. It is. I think that's why it helped me to hear it, because clinical means observable, and observable means provable. Vivian looked at her, really looked at her the way women look at each other when they are deciding how much to say. You're different than I expected, Vivian said. How did you expect me? Angrier? Vivian said simply. Or more, I don't know. More broken. Margaret said you were the one who didn't withdraw, and I thought... She stopped. I thought it would take someone with a different kind of strength than the kind I had. Elena shook her head slowly. I had the same kind of strength you had, she said. I had a stranger at the next table who asked me a question at exactly the right moment. That's the only difference. Vivian was quiet. I've thought about that a lot, Sandra said. The question. Someone asking if you're there by choice. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Nobody asked me that. I just eventually got out. It took 7 more months after I withdrew the report. 7 months of still being in it. She paused. I've thought about what would have happened if someone had asked me that question earlier. The 3 of them sat with that. The booth. The coffee going lukewarm. The sound of the restaurant around them, ordinary and indifferent, and full of people who had no idea what was being held in this particular corner. He's going to see us all in that room, Vivian said finally. Next week. He'll look at us. I know, Elena said. Does that scare you? She thought about the last time she had looked at Darren Mitchell. The way the warmth had drained out of his face until there was nothing underneath but an ordinary frightened man. She thought about holding his gaze while the tide went out. Yes, she said honestly. And no, I think... She stopped. Started again. I think he counted on us being more afraid of him in that room than he'd be of us. I think he's been counting on that his whole life. She paused. I think this is the first time the math doesn't work in his favor. Sandra looked at her across the table. Then we walk in together, she said. Together, Vivian confirmed. Elena nodded. Mini climax number 3. The 3 women. The question no one asked Sandra. Together. 4 days before the hearing, Darren's attorney filed a motion to introduce Elena's mental health history as evidence of credibility concerns. Margaret called her the moment it landed. He's claiming you have a documented anxiety disorder, Margaret said with the controlled precision of a lawyer keeping her anger professional, and that your perception of events during the relationship was materially affected by that condition. Elena sat down. Her classroom was empty. The children were at lunch, and the room had the specific quiet of a space designed for other people's voices. I do have an anxiety disorder, she said. I've been managing it since I was 24. I know, Margaret said. This is a standard tactic. Introduce a condition that pathologizes the witness rather than engaging with the evidence. It's ugly, and it's common, and we are going to dismantle it. A pause. But I need to ask you directly, are you okay? Hearing this, Elena thought about it. The question deserved honest thought, not a reflexive answer. The anxiety disorder had been one of the things Darren had used quietly, consistently, expertly. You're catastrophizing, Elena. You know how you get. That's your anxiety talking, not reality. She had spent 2 years being told that the instrument she used to understand the world was broken, and that therefore the world it showed her couldn't be trusted. It was the most elegant part of his methodology. Undermine the witness before the witness could testify. I'm angry, she said, but I'm okay. Good, Margaret said. Hold on to the anger. It's accurate. What do? We present your treating therapist, Margaret said. Dr. Carol Walsh. I've already reached out to her office. She is prepared to testify that anxiety disorder does not impair the ability to accurately perceive and report events. We also present your school performance evaluations, your students' standardized test scores, the curriculum you developed that the district adopted last year. A pause that had something like satisfaction in it. We're going to show exactly what kind of unreliable person you are. For the second time in 6 weeks, Elena laughed. Mini climax number 4, the motion, the instrument he broke, the anger that was accurate. She told Adrian that night. He was quiet for a long moment after she finished, and then he said, He's scared. I know. Scared men do this. They attack the person rather than the evidence, because attacking the evidence requires engaging with the truth. He paused. It means he can feel the ground moving. Good, she said. Her word again recycled from Patricia, the word that meant justice. Elena. He said her name with a specific weight, the way he did when something careful was coming. I need to tell you something, before the hearing. She straightened slightly. Okay. My name is going to come up, he said. Hargrove has been asking questions about my background, who I am, what my business interests are, whether my involvement in this case constitutes interference. He paused. Some of what he finds will not look clean. My history is not simple, and some of the associations I've had over the years, even legitimate ones, photograph a certain way. She processed this. Are you telling me your being involved makes my case weaker? I'm telling you it's possible Hargrove uses me to muddy the water, he said. To suggest that you've traded one controlling man for another. That the help you received from me was transactional in ways that compromise your credibility. A pause. I want you to know it before you're in that room, not as a warning, as information you deserve to have. She was quiet for a moment. Are you asking me to distance myself from you? She said. No, he said immediately. I'm giving you the choice. There it was again, the question that wasn't quite a question. The open door held without pressure. I'm not distancing myself from anyone who helped me, she said. If Hargrove brings you up, Margaret will handle it. And if she can't, we'll handle it together. She paused. That's how this works now. That's what together means. Silence on the line. Long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Okay, he said finally, and the word in his voice had something new in it this time, something that hadn't been there in the parking lot outside Cassie's building or in the car on Michigan Avenue, something that sounded, if she was honest with herself, like relief. Mini-climax number 5. His history, the muddied water, the together that held. The night before the hearing, Elena couldn't sleep. This was not the old insomnia, the calculating kind, the kind that ran threat assessments and prepared defenses and rehearsed what to say if. This was different. Cleaner. The sleeplessness of someone standing at the edge of something they'd worked toward, unable to close their eyes because the thing was finally real and real things demanded attention. She got up at 2 a.m. and sat at her kitchen table with tea she didn't drink and her phone face up. A message from her sister sent at midnight. I'll be there tomorrow. Front row. I love you. A message from Cassie sent at 11:50. You've got this. Also, the cat misses you. Come visit. A message from Sandra Park sent at 1 a.m. Can't sleep either. See you in the morning. We walk in together. She read them in order. Set the phone down. Picked it up again. She typed to Adrian. Can't sleep. The response came in under a minute. Neither can I. She stared at that for a moment. Then, you don't have to be nervous on my behalf. I know, he wrote back. I'm nervous on mine. She looked at those 4 words for a long time. The specific texture of a man telling the truth about what he felt instead of managing it into something more presentable. Why she typed. A longer pause this time, because tomorrow matters. And things that matter make me nervous. I thought I'd grown out of that, but it turns out I hadn't. She set the phone down and looked at the wall of her new apartment, her chosen walls, her chosen address, her name alone on the lease. She picked the phone back up. That's the most human thing you've said to me, she wrote. Don't tell anyone, he wrote back. Reputation to maintain. She smiled in the dark. Not the practiced smile, not the one that covered things. The other kind. The one that belonged to her. Get some sleep, she wrote. You too, he wrote. She didn't sleep for another hour, but the hour was peaceful. Mini-climax number 6. The messages. The 2 a.m. kitchen. The most human thing. She walked into the Bar Association hearing at 9:17 in the morning between Sandra Park and Vivian Torres. The room was formal and still, and full of the specific gravity of proceedings where someone's professional life was on the line. The disciplinary panel sat at the front, 3 people, 2 women and a man, with the carefully neutral expressions of people trained to reveal nothing before they had heard everything. Darren was already there. She had known he would be. She had prepared herself in the way that you prepare for something that preparation can only partially help with, intellectually ready, emotionally braced. But the specific reality of seeing him across a formal room in his best suit, flanked by Hargrove with the composed and reasonable expression of a man who believed he could still talk his way out of the shape of his own life that had a different texture than the preparation. She looked at him directly, did not look away, did not arrange her face into blankness. He looked back at her, and for a fraction of a second, so brief she might have imagined it, but she didn't think she did. Something moved in his expression that was not composure. That was in fact the opposite of composure. He had not expected all 3 of them. She could see it. The rapid recalculation. Sandra on her left, Vivian on her right, Elena in the center, all 3 of them, walking in like they had planned it because they had planned it, standing in the lobby downstairs 5 minutes earlier, Sandra saying together, and Vivian nodding, and Elena leading them through the door. He had never had to look at all 3 of his patterns standing in the same room. He had never had to see what the accumulated shape of his choices looked like when it had faces and was looking back at him. Mini-climax number 7. The 3 women entering. The thing that moved in his expression. The accumulated shape. Margaret's opening was 12 minutes long and did not raise her voice once. She presented the timeline, 3 women overlapping dates, consistent methodology. She presented the incident reports and the circumstances of their withdrawal. She presented the photograph of Cassie's building, time-stamped, and traced to Darren's hired investigator. She presented the protective order violation. She presented Vivian Torres's photographs, 3 years old, still on a friend's phone, still exactly what they were. Elena watched Darren's face through all of it. He had a very good lawyer. Hargrove was smooth and experienced and knew exactly how to hold a skeptical expression without tipping into contempt. He objected at the procedurally correct moments. He made the required arguments about pattern evidence and prejudicial inference with the fluid competence of a man who had done this many times. But Margaret had built the case like a structure, not one load-bearing wall, but a whole architecture, each piece supporting the others, and Hargrove could chip at individual pieces without changing what the whole thing held up. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she stood and looked at the panel and said everything she had told Chen, all of it in order, without the calculated blankness, without the practiced stillness. With her actual face. With the specific, unadorned truth of a woman who had spent 2.5 years being told her perception couldn't be trusted, speaking with full trust in her own perception. She did not cry. She had wondered if she would. The grief was there. It had always been there, would probably always be there in some form. But what sat in front of the grief right now was something more immediate. Something that felt, if she had to name it, like the satisfaction of accuracy. Of saying the true thing in the room where it could finally do something. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Hargrove's cross-examination took 22 minutes. He raised her anxiety disorder. Dr. Walsh's testimony had already been entered into the record, and Margaret handled the redirect with the efficient precision of someone who had anticipated every question and was mildly disappointed by how predictable they were. When Hargrove mentioned Adrian obliquely carefully, the insinuation wearing the costume of a procedural concern about the origin of certain investigative resources, Margaret stood before Elena could take a full breath. The funding of legal representation for an abuse survivor, Margaret said, is not a conflict of interest. It is what people with resources do when they witness injustice. If Mr. Hargrove would like to argue that Ms. Carter's case is weakened because someone helped pay for it, I invite him to make that argument explicitly so the panel can evaluate it with the transparency it deserves. Hargrove did not make the argument explicitly. Mini-climax. Number 8. Margaret's structure. Elena's actual face. The argument Hargrove didn't make. They broke for lunch at 12:30. Elena, Sandra, and Vivian found a table in the building's cafeteria, not because the food was appealing, but because none of them had the bandwidth to navigate a restaurant. They sat with sandwiches they mostly didn't eat, and the collective decompression of people who had just done something enormous and were still processing the size of it. He looked at me when I testified, Vivian said. The whole time. Like he was trying to recalibrate me somehow. Like if he looked long enough, I'd become the version of me he needed. He did the same thing to me, Sandra said. I kept thinking, this is what he does. He looks at you like you're the problem. Like your testimony is a betrayal of something you owe him. Elena nodded. She had felt it too. The gaze, the specific pressure of it. The old trained reflex to manage his reaction instead of just saying the true thing. But you kept going, Vivian said, looking at Elena. So did you, Elena said. You made it easier, Vivian said simply. Elena didn't know what to do with that, the weight of being someone else's easier. She turned it over in her mind for a moment, examining it without deflecting it. I think that's what it's supposed to do, she said finally. When you go first, you make it easier for the one behind you. And she makes it easier for the one behind her. She paused. He built his whole system on each of us being alone. That's the only way it works. The moment we're not alone, the system breaks. Sandra put her hand on the table, palm up. Vivian put her hand over Sandra's. Elena put her hand over Vivian's. No words. Just the specific sufficient language of 3 women who had survived the same thing by different paths, arriving at the same table. Mini climax. Number 9. The gaze and what it tried to do. The hands on the table. The system broken. The panel reconvened at 2 o'clock. The afternoon session was Hargrove's case character witnesses from the firm colleagues who testified to Darren's professional integrity with the uncomfortable body language of people doing what their careers required rather than what their consciences wanted. A therapist Darren had seen for 4 months who testified carefully within the bounds of what he was legally permitted to say, and managed to say almost nothing useful to either side. And then Darren himself. He testified for 40 minutes. Elena sat in the third row and watched and listened and tried to hear him as he actually was, rather than as the accumulated fear of him she'd been managing for years. What she heard was very good. She had always known very good at this. He spoke about his childhood, a difficult father. She noted the therapy buzzwords deployed with practiced ease, and about his commitment to growth and his awareness of past patterns, and his genuine, sincere, documented work to become a different man. He did not deny everything. That she realized was the sophistication of it. He acknowledged that his word was controlling. Not violent, not abusive, controlling. He was willing to own the word controlling because it was the word that came with therapy and growth and documented progress, as opposed to the words that came with consequences. She watched the panel listen to him. She watched their faces and could not read them, which Margaret had told her was normal and intentional and meant nothing about the outcome. And she thought about Marcus and the uncle and the cheese, about the laugh that had startled her with its own realness, about the text messages at 2 in the morning from people who loved her, about Sandra's hand palm up on the cafeteria table, about walking in through the door between 2 women instead of alone. She thought about all of it while Darren Mitchell told his story, and she felt not the absence of fear, because the fear was still there, would probably always be there in some form, was honest enough to know that. But something sitting in front of it. Something that had been growing for 6 weeks in an apartment on the north side, with her name alone on the lease. Herself. Just herself. Fully and without apology present. Mini climax number 10. Darren's testimony. The word controlling. Herself fully present. The panel did not issue its decision that day. Margaret had told her not to expect it. Deliberation, she said, took time, and immediate decisions from disciplinary panels were rare because they wanted the record to show that nothing had been rushed. Elena understood this intellectually and found it difficult emotionally, which Margaret had also told her was normal. Outside the building in the cold, late afternoon air, she stood with Sandra and Vivian, while their respective lawyers collected their things and Hargrove's team filed out with the studied composure of people unwilling to show any reading of the day. Darren came out a different exit. She didn't see him again. Her sister was there, true to the text front row all day, and now standing on the sidewalk with her coat buttoned wrong and her eyes still red in a way that said she'd been crying for most of the afternoon. Elena walked to her, and her sister put her arms around her and held on in the specific, slightly desperate way of someone who was apologizing for something they hadn't done but felt responsible for anyway. "You were incredible," her sister said into her shoulder. "The whole time. You didn't waver once." "I wavered on the inside," Elena said. "Nobody could tell." "That's the skill," Elena said. "I just finally used it for something that was actually mine." Her sister pulled back and looked at her, really looked the way someone looks when they are memorizing a person's face. "When did you get so—" She stopped, tried again. "When did you become this—" Elena thought about it. She thought about the moment in Carmine's when she said no for the first time to a man who had never heard it from her before. She thought about Margaret's legal pad and Chen's 14-month-old file, and Sandra crying in a parking garage, and Vivian's photographs on a friend's phone. She thought about the ground she'd felt under her feet in the new apartment on the north side. "I think I was always this," she said. "I just needed someone to ask me the right question." Her sister held her again, held on longer this time. Across the sidewalk, Adrian was standing by the black car. He had been there all day, not in the room, not at her elbow, just present at the edges in the way she had come to recognize as his. Available, not insistent. She met his eyes from across the sidewalk. He gave her a single nod, not congratulatory, not performative. Just, "I see you. I'm here. You did this." She nodded back, and the something that had been building for 6 weeks in the apartment on the north side building, quietly without being forced in the space between 2 a.m. texts and phone calls about children and cheese, and the specific sound of a man laughing when he hadn't planned to. That something settled forward in her chest and made itself known. Not love yet. Not in the nameable, declarable way. But the shape of what came before love. The specific warmth of a person becoming real to you. The beginning of something chosen with open eyes. She looked away first this time. Not because she was afraid. Because the moment felt like something worth treating carefully. Like something new and living that needed room to breathe. She took her sister's arm and walked toward the car. Mini climax number 11. The sister who memorized her face. The something that made itself known. The beginning treated carefully. Margaret called at 7:30 that evening. Elena was home. Her north side apartment, the one with her name on the lease, sitting on the floor, because she still didn't have enough furniture eating Thai food out of the container, because she'd forgotten to buy plates, which was somehow the most normal thing that had happened to her in months. "The panel is deliberating," Margaret said. "Expected decision within 10 business days, which is fast for them. It means they have enough." A pause. "Elena, I've been doing this for 22 years. I know what fast means when a panel does it." Elena set down the container. "It means they have enough," she said. "It means they have more than enough," Margaret said. "What you 3 built in that room today, the record, the pattern, the 3 consistent testimonies, that's not something he talks his way out of. The question now is, degree, not direction." Elena was quiet for a moment. "I don't need to know the degree," she said. "I just needed the direction." Margaret was quiet on her end. "You know what I tell young lawyers," she said finally. "I tell them that the best cases are the ones where the truth is doing most of the work. Where all you have to do is clear a path for it." A pause. "Today, Elena, the truth did most of the work. You just refused to let anyone block it." Elena sat on the floor of her own apartment with Thai food going cold, and the specific warmth of a woman who was finally fully unmistakably on the right side of the story she had always been living. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet," Margaret said, in a tone that meant but yes. "You're welcome." After she hung up, Elena sat for a while longer. The apartment was quiet, and hers, and full of the specific piece of a place that no one else had a key to. She picked up her phone one more time and typed to Adrian. "Margaret says the direction is clear. Just waiting on degree." The response came fast like it always did now. "I know. She called me too." Elena smiled at her phone. "Of course she did." "Are you okay?" he wrote. She looked around her apartment. The boxes she still hadn't fully unpacked. The floor she was sitting on because she still didn't have enough chairs. The life she was building piece by piece with her own hands from a starting point she had chosen herself. "More than okay," she wrote. "I think I'm actually okay." She set the phone down and finished her dinner and let the quiet be exactly what it was. Not the quiet of a woman managing her own smallness, but the quiet of a woman who had finally, after a very long time, taken up the full amount of space she was entitled to. The decision came on a Thursday, not the 10 business days Margaret had estimated 7. 7 days after the hearing at 4:43 in the afternoon, while Elena was helping Marcus sound out a word he'd been fighting with for 10 minutes. Her phone buzzed on the corner of her desk, and she ignored it the first time, because Marcus had the word, almost she could see it in the way his mouth was working through the syllables, and she was not going to abandon him at the edge of something he was about to catch. He got it on the 4th try. His face opened up the way children's faces do when something clicks sudden whole unself-conscious. Elena put her hand up, and he high-fived it so hard her palm stung. Then she looked at her phone. Margaret. 2 missed calls and a text that said, "Call me the moment you can." She stepped into the hallway. Her heart was doing something loud and specific in her chest. She called Margaret back, and Margaret picked up before the first ring finished, which told her everything, before a single word was spoken. "Darren Mitchell has been disbarred," Margaret said. The hallway was very quiet. "Effective immediately," Margaret continued. The panel found the pattern of conduct, all 3 testimonies. The incident reports the violation of the protective order constituted conduct involving moral turpitude and dishonesty, sufficient to permanently revoke his license to practice law in the state of Illinois. A pause. "Elena, permanently. This is not a suspension. This is not a censure. This is over." Elena put her back against the wall of the school hallway. The same hallway she walked every day, with the children's artwork taped at eye level, and the smell of crayons, and old carpet, and the specific familiar warmth of a building that had always been entirely hers, and she felt the word land in her chest. Permanently. "Are you there?" Margaret asked. "I'm here," Elena said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. "Chen is filing the criminal charges today as well," Margaret said. "The disbarment triggers the bar's mandatory referral to the state's attorney. Combined with Chen's file, the violation and the third-party surveillance evidence, the state's attorney is moving forward." Another pause. "He is going to be arrested, Elena, probably today. Certainly by tomorrow." The artwork on the walls. A drawing of a family by a child named Destiny, 3 stick figures under a yellow sun. A collage of autumn leaves by a boy who had spelled his own name wrong in the corner and not noticed, and she had let it stay that way because it was perfect exactly as it was. "Okay," she said. "That's all you have to say," Margaret said, not unkindly, with the specific curiosity of a woman who had watched Elena say "okay" at pivotal moments and had started to understand what the word carried. "I'm going to need a minute," Elena said, "and then I'm going to feel it. But right now, I'm standing in a school hallway, and I have 12 kids on the other side of that door who need me to come back in." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "You know what that is," she said. "What you just said." "What?" "That's a woman who knows the difference between her life and her crisis," Margaret said. "That's what healed looks like, Elena. It doesn't look like the absence of feeling. It looks like the ability to feel it in the right order." Elena closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 second of the hallway and the crayons and the yellow sun drawn by a child named Destiny and the enormous, quiet, specific reality of permanently. Then she opened her eyes and walked back into her classroom. Mini-climax number 1. Permanently. The hallway. The right order. She called Adrian from the parking lot after school. He picked up on the first ring like always. She had stopped noting it consciously. It had become simply part of the texture of him. The way certain people answered calls, the specific language of availability. "Disbarred," she said. "And Chen is filing criminal charges today." A silence. Not an empty one. The full kind. "How are you?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Margaret says that's healthy. Margaret is right about most things." "She is." Elena shifted her bag on her shoulder. The parking lot was cold and bright and completely ordinary. "I thought I'd feel bigger. I thought there'd be more of a, I don't know, explosion, some enormous feeling that matched the size of it. And instead I feel like I can breathe," she said. "Just normally breathe, like something I didn't know was sitting on my chest, got up and walked out of the room." She paused. "Is that enough? Is that an appropriate response to something like this?" "I think," Adrian said carefully, "that when something has been pressing on you for long enough, the removal of it doesn't feel like addition. It feels like restoration. You're not getting something new. You're getting back to yourself." A pause. "That's not a small thing. It just feels quiet, because quiet is what you were supposed to feel all along." She stood in the parking lot and let that move through her. "That's the most useful thing anyone has said to me today," she said. "I have my moments," he said. She almost said something else. She had it on the edge of her tongue. The thing she had been not quite saying for several weeks now, the thing that had shape and weight, but that she had been treating carefully like something new and living that needed room to breathe. She felt it there ready, and she chose deliberately with full awareness to save it for a different conversation. One that happened in person. One that deserved more than a parking lot phone call. "Come to dinner," she said instead. "Tomorrow, my place. I'll cook." A beat. "You're cooking," he said. "Don't make it a thing," she said. "I'm a perfectly competent cook." "I didn't say otherwise." "Your pause said otherwise." "My pause," he said with something warm moving through his voice, "was pure surprise. Not at your cooking, at the invitation." She thought about that. About what it meant that the invitation surprised him, this man who had rearranged the shape of her crisis with 12 sentences over a restaurant dinner, and then spent 6 weeks being careful not to ask for anything in return. That he could still be surprised by her choosing him. That it still registered as a gift rather than a given. 7 o'clock, she said. "Don't be late." "I won't," he said. She hung up and stood in the cold for another moment, feeling the specific quality of the afternoon ordinary and cold, and full of a future that was for the first time in years entirely unscheduled by someone else's hand. Mini climax. Number 2. The breathing, the invitation, the surprise that it still registered as a gift. Darren Mitchell was arrested at 6:18 the following morning. She knew the time because Chen texted her 6:18 a.m. "Done. You'll receive formal notification from the state's attorney's office today." She was already awake. She had been awake since 5. Not with anxiety, but with the particular alertness of someone whose body had decided that today was important enough to begin early. She read the text sitting on the edge of her bed in the gray pre-dawn, and felt something move through her that she could not name precisely. Not triumph. Triumph implied she had wanted something bad for him, and what she had wanted, she understood now, was never specifically about him. It was about herself. About reclaiming the ground he had taken. What she felt was closer to completion. The closing of a circuit. The moment when a story stops being unfinished. She texted Sandra. "He was arrested this morning." 6:18 a.m. Sandra's response came in under 2 minutes even at that hour. "I'm shaking. Elena." "I'm actually shaking." "Me too," Elena wrote back. Because she was. She realized her hands slightly holding the phone. Not with fear. With the specific unfamiliar tremor of someone whose body was processing the end of something it had been braced against for a very long time. She texted Vivian the same message. Vivian called her back immediately, not texting, and they talked for 20 minutes, not about legal specifics or next steps, but about the strange feeling of it, the way closure didn't feel the way movies told you it would, dramatic and clean, but instead felt like weather changing. Gradual, then sudden, then undeniable. "I keep thinking about who I would have been," Vivian said, "if it had never happened." "I used to think about that too," Elena said. "I don't anymore." "Why?" Elena thought about it. About the woman who got into a black car with a stranger because the stranger had asked the right question. About Margaret and her red blazer and her legal pad. About Patricia sitting on a child's desk. About her sister, whose eyes were still red on a courthouse sidewalk. About Marcus and the word he'd fought for 10 minutes and then caught. "Because the person I am now," she said slowly, "is not who I would have been. But she's who I actually am, and she knows things the other version never would have had to learn." A pause. "I'd rather be her, even with what it cost." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," she said softly. "Me too." Mini climax. Number 36:18 a.m. The trembling that wasn't fear. The person she'd rather be. Said. She cooked that evening with the specific focused pleasure of someone doing something entirely for themselves and for the person they had invited. She had called her sister at noon to describe the menu, and her sister had listened and then said with the careful neutrality of someone asking a real question behind a practical one. "So this is a dinner." "What does that mean?" Elena said. "It means, is this the kind of dinner where you want advice beforehand?" Elena smiled at her phone. "What advice would you give me?" "I'd say," her sister said carefully, "that you are 6 weeks out from the worst thing that happened to you, and that 6 weeks is not very long, and that you should be gentle with yourself about how fast anything moves. And," a pause, "and I've heard you on the phone with him, late at night when you think Cassie's asleep. Cassie told me." Another pause. "He sounds like someone who waits." Elena thought about that. The specific quality of a man who waits not from passivity, not from lack of interest, but from the principled understanding that some things need to arrive at their own pace to be real. "He does wait," she said. "That's one of the things." "Then you're fine," her sister said. "Go cook your dinner." She cooked, and the apartment smelled like garlic and something warm, and she set the table with the 2 plates she now owned, and she thought about the blue dress, and the rehearsed smile, and the woman who had calculated every breath, and she felt the distance between that woman and this one standing in her own kitchen, cooking a meal she had chosen for a person she had invited, and the distance was enormous, and it was 6 weeks. And it was also in some ways a whole life. Mini, climax number 4. The dinner. The man who waits. The enormous distance of 6 weeks. Adrian arrived at 7 exactly. He brought wine 1 bottle, not 2, which she appreciated, because 2 would have said something about expectation, and 1 said something about presence. He stood in the doorway of her apartment, and looked at it, not with assessment, not with the evaluating eye of someone cataloging what it said about her, but with something quieter, the look of someone taking in a place where a person has made themselves at home. "It suits you," he said. "It's still mostly empty," she said. "Suits you anyway." She let him in, and the apartment was warm and smelled like dinner, and he sat at her kitchen table. Her table 2 chairs bought herself, and she finished the last pieces of the meal, and they talked. The way they had been talking for 6 weeks. Easy and without performance, the conversation of 2 people who had stopped editing themselves somewhere around week 3 and hadn't started again. She told him about Vivian's call that morning, about the question, who would you have been, and what she'd said back. He was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe it?" he asked. "What you told her, that you'd rather be who you are." "Yes," she said. "I didn't expect to, but yes." "Even with everything it cost?" "Even with that?" She looked at him. "Does that seem strange to you?" "No," he said. "I think the people who come through something hard and don't pretend it didn't cost anything, they're the ones who actually get to keep what they learned." He paused. "The ones who minimize it, who say I'm fine, it's fine, I'm over it, they carry it differently. Heavier." She thought about his mother. She thought about the thing behind his eyes when he said, "I couldn't help her," the weight he still carried, the specific heaviness of a wound that had been minimized rather than named. "You've been carrying yours for a long time," she said quietly. He looked at her, not startled, more seen. "Yes," he said simply. "Is it lighter?" she asked. "Since any of this?" A pause. "Long enough to be real." "Yes," he said. "It is." He held her gaze with the steady, unhurried attention she had come to understand as his version of openness. "You did that. Not intentionally. But you did." She looked at this man across her kitchen table. The silver temples, the patient hands, the composure that had a real person underneath it, who could be surprised by an invitation and nervous the night before something that mattered. She felt the thing on the edge of her tongue again. This time, she let it come. "I want to tell you something," she said. "And I want you to hear it as information, not as pressure. Because I've had enough of the version where someone tells me what I feel and I just have to receive it. So this is me telling you, and you can do what you want with it." He waited. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said. "I think it started somewhere around the 2nd week when you apologized without qualification and without turning it into a conversation about yourself." I think it's been building since then, and I know it's fast, and I know my timeline is complicated, and I know you know all of that." She paused. "But I needed you to know, because choosing to say it is different from having it happen to me. And I am done with things happening to me. I want to choose my life from now on. All of it." The kitchen was very quiet. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. His face was not composed, or rather composed in the way that things are when composure is all that's holding something large together. "Elena," he said, and then stopped. She waited. "I've been careful," he said. "Deliberately careful. Because of the timing. Because of everything you've been through, because the last thing I wanted was to be another man who decided for you what you felt." He paused. "And also because—" Another pause. Longer. The kind that meant something real was working its way to the surface. "Because if I said it and you weren't ready, I'd rather wait indefinitely than push. I'd rather never say it than say it at the wrong time and have it land as pressure instead of truth." She understood that with every part of herself. The specific, costly care of a person who had learned that timing was everything when someone was healing. "It's the right time," she said. "I'm telling you, it's the right time." He looked at her across the kitchen table with his careful hands and his silver temples and the weight he had been carrying for 30 years because of a woman who never got asked the right question. And he said, "I love you. I've loved you since the parking lot outside Chen's office, when you told me I needed to ask before I acted. Since you said I need this story to be mine. I've loved you since then." The kitchen was warm and smelled like garlic, and the 2 plates were on the table, and the wine was open. And outside the North Side apartment, Chicago was doing what Chicago always did, enormous and indifferent, and full of a million people navigating their own private wars. Elena Carter reached across the table and put her hand in his. Not grasping, not desperate. The steady, unhurried touch of a woman making a choice with open eyes. Mini-climax number 5. The information, not pressure. The love since the parking lot. The hand across the table. The criminal trial was set for October. 5 months away, which was long enough that Elena had time to build toward it without living inside it. Margaret called every 2 weeks with updates. The state's attorney's case was strong, she said consistently, and with the measured confidence of someone who meant it rather than performing reassurance. Darren had entered a not guilty plea through Hargrove, which was expected. What was not expected was the 4th woman. Margaret called on a Tuesday morning in May. Elena was in her classroom, the children at specials grading papers at her desk. "A woman named Christine Hale contacted the state's attorney's office yesterday," Margaret said. "She worked at a non-profit in Darren's building 4 years ago. She has a restraining order from that period, one he violated twice, both violations dismissed when the judge retired, and the case was reassigned." A pause. "She has been following the case in the news. When she saw your name and Sandra's name and Vivian's name, she said she felt something she described as, and I'm quoting her, permission." Elena sat back in her chair. Permission. One word. The thing each of them had given the next one simply by not going silent. Sandra waiting for Elena. Christine waiting for Sandra's name. Women lined up behind each other in the specific dark of their separate silences, each one waiting for the one ahead to take a step that made the step possible. "4 of us," Elena said. "4 of you," Margaret said. Elena, 4 consistent testimonies across 5 years, is not a pattern he can characterize as misunderstanding or misperception or the anxiety disorder of one witness. 4 of you is a career. 4 of you is who this man actually is. A pause. "I need you to know something. What you did going first, not withdrawing it, did this. Christine Hale is testifying because you testified. Sandra testified because you testified. Vivian came forward because you went first. You did not do this alone, but you made it possible." Elena looked at the stack of graded papers on her desk. Marcus's handwriting at the top, still enormous and slightly tilted, improving, week by week, in the particular incremental way that children improve, at things not linearly, not dramatically, but steadily, stubbornly, one page at a time. "I had good people around me," she said. "You did," Margaret agreed. "But you also had to choose to use them. That part was yours." Mini-climax number 6. Christine Hale, Permission, The Chain of Women. That's why. She told her class about courage that afternoon. Not about herself, she would never do that. They were 8 years old, and her private life was not curriculum. But they were reading a book about a girl who did something frightening, and she asked them, "What does brave feel like on the inside?" The answers came fast, the way children's answers did. Overlapping, unfiltered brilliant in the specific way that unedited honesty is brilliant. "It feels like your stomach is saying no, but your brain says go," said a girl named Keisha. "It feels like you might throw up, but you do it anyway," said Marcus. "It feels like being scared and doing the thing at the same time," said a quiet boy named Thomas, who rarely spoke, and when he did, said things that stopped the room. Elena looked at Thomas. "That's exactly right," she said. "Brave doesn't mean not scared. It means scared and doing it anyway." Thomas nodded seriously, like he had suspected this and was glad to have it confirmed. After school, walking to her car, she thought about what Thomas had said and felt the truth of it in her own body, the specific remembered sensation of sitting across from Darren in Carmine's with her hands in her lap and the whisper in her ear and choosing to say yes to a stranger's question anyway. Scared and doing it anyway. Scared and doing it anyway, every single day for 6 weeks. One decision at a time, until the decisions accumulated into something that looked from the outside like a woman who knew what she was doing. She had not known. She had only kept choosing. Mini-climax number 7. Thomas. Scared and doing it anyway. The accumulated choosing. Summer arrived the way Chicago summers did, fast and total, and slightly shocking after the long gray persistence of winter and spring. Elena's apartment acquired furniture gradually, in the specific way of a person who was choosing things rather than inheriting them or accepting them from someone with different taste. A couch she sat in 3 stores before finding. A kitchen table that was slightly too big for the space and exactly right for the life she was building. Bookshelves she assembled herself over a Saturday afternoon, with Cassie reading the instructions out loud, and both of them disagreeing about whether the manual was in English or a language adjacent to English. Adrian came to dinner twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Not always at her place, sometimes at a restaurant he had discovered, never Carmine's, never anywhere that carried the wrong weight. They walked along the lakefront on Sunday mornings, when the city was quiet, and the water was the specific green-gray of early summer. They talked about his work, the real estate, the investments, the edges that weren't always clean, and that he was more forthcoming about, now incrementally more forthcoming. Each disclosure, the small act of trust that trust was built from. She asked questions. He answered honestly, and when he didn't have an honest answer, he said so, and she had decided early on that this was the standard she required. Not perfection, not a clean history, but honesty about the history he had. "You make it easier," he told her once on one of those Sunday mornings, "to be the version of myself I actually want to be." "That version was always there," she said. "I know," he said, "but it's different when someone can see it." She understood that completely. One morning in July, she woke up and lay in the quiet of her apartment and realized that she had not performed a threat assessment before opening her eyes, had not calculated what mood would be waiting for her, had not prepared a defense for a day she hadn't lived yet. She had simply woken up, present, in her own life, without armor. She lay there for a moment registering it, not crying, not overwhelmed, just noting it the way you note the weather when it is finally the weather you needed. Then she got up and made coffee and called her sister, who answered on the second ring and said, "You sound different," before Elena had said anything at all. "Good different?" Elena asked. "The best different," her sister said. Mini-climax number 8. The furniture chosen. The Sunday mornings. The morning without armor. The trial began on the 14th of October. She had known the date for months, and had carried it the way you carry something significant, not obsessively. Not in a way that made it the center of every day, but with the steady awareness of a woman who understood what it meant and had decided not to let the waiting diminish the living that came before it. She walked into the Cook County Courthouse between Sandra and Vivian, with Christine Hale behind them, 4 women who had never been in the same room before the week of jury selection, and who had over 3 dinners and a group chat that Sandra had named with characteristic directness. The case becomes something Elena didn't have an exact word for. Not friends in the uncomplicated way of people who met under normal circumstances. Something more specific than that. The kind of bond that forms between people who have survived the same storm by different routes and arrived on the same shore. The trial lasted 9 days. Margaret tried the case with the same structural precision she brought to everything. The pattern across 5 years, 4 testimonies. The documentation that had accumulated piece by piece over months. Hargrove was good, as he had always been good, and there were moments, long moments on day 3, on day 6, where Elena felt the old fear flicker, the trained reflex of a woman who had learned to expect the floor to give way precisely when she thought she was standing on something solid. But the floor held. On day 4, Chen testified for 3 hours. He walked the jury through the 14-month file with the patient, methodical clarity of a detective who had been building to this moment for longer than most of the people in the room knew. He presented the surveillance investigator, the violated protective order, the phone calls to Elena's sister time-stamped and recorded. On day 7, Elena took the stand. She had testified before at the bar hearing, which had been its own kind of enormous. But this was different. This was a jury. 12 people who would decide based in part on what they saw in her face and heard in her voice what the truth was and what it was worth. She sat in the witness chair and looked at the 12 faces, and then looked at Margaret, who gave her a single small nod. Then she told the truth, all of it. The first text without a question mark. The blue dress she wore because she was afraid not to. The hand under the table. The 8-word whisper. The photograph of Cassie's building. The 9 messages in escalating order. The instrument he had tried to break, calling it her anxiety, her perception, her unreliability, and what it had felt like to reclaim it. She talked for 90 minutes. She did not cry. She did not waver. And she looked at Darren Mitchell once in the middle of her testimony when Hargrove objected to something, and the judge ruled against him, and the room resettled, and she turned her eyes to where Darren sat, and what she saw in his face was not what she had feared she would see. Not contempt. Not the managing smile. Not the calculated warmth or the flat emptiness underneath it. What she saw was a man who had run out of instruments, a man who had built his power on silence and had not understood until this room that silence was a structure only as strong as the people inside it decided it was. And the people inside it had decided. She looked away. She was done looking at him. Mini-climax number 9, day 7. The witness chair. The man who ran out of instruments. The jury took 11 hours. Elena spent most of those hours in a small room down the hall from the courtroom, with Sandra and Vivian and Christine drinking bad coffee and not talking about the verdict because there was nothing to say about it that wasn't already said. They talked about other things. Sandra's new job. Christine's daughter, who was 7, and apparently going through a phase involving extremely strong opinions about the color orange. Vivian's plan to take a trip somewhere she had always wanted to go and had kept putting off for reasons she was no longer willing to accept. Where? Elena asked. Portugal, Vivian said. I've wanted to go since I was 22, and every year there was a reason not to. Money timing him, always something. She paused. I'm going in January. Good, Elena said. Her word. The word that meant justice, the word that meant right order, the word that meant yes, that is exactly what should happen. At 7:44 in the evening, the jury returned. The foreperson was a woman in her 60s, with the steady, unperformative bearing of someone who had made a decision and was not second-guessing it. She stood and read the verdict, and Elena heard the words and felt them land in her body in the specific way that true things land. Not loudly, not with the dramatic percussion of television courtrooms, but deeply. Settling into something permanent. Guilty. On all charges. Sandra gripped her hand. Elena gripped back. Vivian had her other hand, and Christine had Vivian's. And the four of them sat in that row of the courtroom, holding on to each other in the specific way of people who have carried something heavy for a very long time and have just set it down. Darren was remanded immediately. She watched them lead him out. She did not look away, and she did not look at him with triumph, and she did not look at him with pity. She looked at him with the clear level gaze of a woman for whom he was now simply finished. The last time Elena Carter looked at Darren Mitchell, she felt nothing that required managing. That was its own kind of verdict. Mini-climax number 10, 7:44 p.m. Guilty. The last time she looked at him. Outside on the courthouse steps in the October cold, Margaret shook her hand with the firm, two-handed grip of a woman who did not hug clients, but sometimes wished she did. "You did this," Margaret said. "We did this," Elena said. "Yes," Margaret said. "But you went first." Chen was there standing off to the side, in the way he stood everywhere present, but not intrusive. A man who had learned the same lesson as Adrian about the difference between being available and being insistent. He caught her eye and nodded once, and she nodded back, and that was enough. Her sister was crying on the steps, had been crying since the verdict, possibly since day 4 of the testimony, and had the specific red-eyed radiance of a woman who was crying with relief rather than grief and making no effort to stop. "I'm so proud of you," her sister said. "I've been proud of you since Carmine's, but tonight is Elena. Tonight." Elena held her sister on the courthouse steps in the cold October air and felt the hug all the way through, not managing it, not processing it from behind glass, but actually feeling it, present, undefended, entirely herself. Adrian was waiting at the bottom of the steps, not at the top, not at her elbow, not positioning himself for the photograph-worthy moment. At the bottom, with his hands in his coat pockets, looking up at her with an expression that was not composed and not performed but simply his. The face of a man who loved someone and was watching her finish something. She came down the steps. He said nothing immediately. He understood she had learned that some moments needed to arrive fully before language was added to them. Then he said, "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly, the way she always did now, the way she had earned the right to do by going through enough truth that honesty had become less frightening than its absence. "Like myself," she said. "Completely, entirely like myself." He looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said quietly, "is the best thing I've heard in a very long time." She took his hand. Not urgently, not with the trembling grip of someone holding on for safety, with the steady, deliberate touch of a woman choosing where to put her hand and knowing exactly why. Mini-climax number 11. The bottom of the steps, entirely herself, the hand chosen. She went back to teaching the next morning. Not because she had to. Margaret had told her she could take time. The school district had offered a leave. Everyone in her life had made space available. She went back because she wanted to. Because her classroom was hers, and her students were hers, and Marcus was going to have a new spelling list on his desk, and she wanted to be the one who put it there. She walked in at 7:50, same as always, and hung up her coat and turned on the lights, and stood in the room that had been hers for 6 years, with the student artwork on the walls, and the smell of crayons and old carpet, and the yellow sun drawn by destiny under which a family of stick figures stood, as if the sun would always be there. Patricia appeared in the doorway at 8. She looked at Elena for a long moment without speaking. Then, "You look like yourself." Elena smiled. Her sister had said the same thing months ago on a different morning that felt like a different life. "I think I finally am," she said. Patricia nodded once firmly with the decisive satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting for this particular morning for a long time. "Good," Patricia said. Her word too now. "Good." The first child arrived at 8:15. Marcus was always first, backpack already half open, something already on his mind. "Ms. Carter," he said, dropping his bag in the general direction of his cubby. "Good morning, Marcus." "My uncle says cheese is a legitimate food group," he announced. "I need you to know that, because we're doing food pyramids today, and he's going to ask me about it." Elena looked at him, this 8-year-old boy with his enormous handwriting and his unstoppable observations, and his particular gift for reminding her why she was in this room, and she felt the laugh building, the real kind, the kind that had come back to her 6 weeks ago and had not left since. "Tell your uncle," she said, "that the food pyramid and I will have a conversation." Marcus considered this. "He won't believe you," he said seriously. "I know," she said. "I'll survive." He shrugged and went to his seat, and the other children began to arrive, one, and then two, and then all 12 of them, small and loud, and entirely themselves. And the room filled with the sound that Elena Carter had chosen her whole adult life to be surrounded by, the sound of people learning something new, unself-conscious about the effort, unafraid of the attempt. She stood at the front of her classroom on the morning after the verdict, and she taught. 6 months later. Elena Carter stood in a bookstore on a Tuesday evening and read to a room of 43 people, not about herself, never about herself, but about a fictional woman who had done something brave and who had done it afraid. She had written the piece over the winter in the evenings after school at her kitchen table that was slightly too big for the space. She had written it for Sandra, who had waited 14 months for someone to go first. For Christine, who had needed to see a name in a newspaper before she could find her own. For Vivian, who was in Portugal right now, looking at something she had been putting off for 12 years. For the women she would never meet, who were somewhere tonight sitting across a candlelit table from someone who had told them not to think about leaving. She wrote it for Thomas, who had said that brave meant scared and doing it anyway. And she wrote it, if she was honest for herself, for the woman who had put on a blue dress she didn't want to wear, and gone to a dinner that was never about dinner, and had found at the table next to hers a question that changed the direction of everything. After she finished reading, a woman in the front row, 50-something, silver hair, hands folded in her lap, with the particular stillness of someone who had been very still for a very long time, raised her hand and asked, "How did you know? When you were in that situation, how did you know it was real? That what you were experiencing was real and not what he said it was?" The room was very quiet. Elena looked at her. She thought about the chalk dust and the empty classroom, about the blue dress, about 8 words whispered over a white tablecloth, about a question asked by a stranger at the next table that had nothing to do with rescue and everything to do with the return of a choice to the person it belonged to. "I knew," Elena said quietly, "the moment someone asked me if I was there by choice, not because the question gave me new information, but because I already knew the answer." She paused. The hardest part wasn't knowing the truth. It was finding the conditions where saying it was possible. Another pause. That's what we can do for each other. We can create the conditions, ask the question, make it possible for someone to say the thing they already know. The woman in the front row nodded slowly. Her hands were still in her lap. Something moved in her face, quiet, internal, the movement of a person deciding something. Elena saw it. She recognized it completely. Mini climax number 12. The bookstore. The woman in the front row. The conditions created. She walked home that night through the November cold, and the city was enormous and indifferent around her, and she was entirely at home inside it. Adrian was waiting at her apartment. He had a key now, given freely, which was different from a key taken, which was different from a key that meant ownership. It meant, you are welcome in the space where I live, and I trust you in it, and that trust is a choice I made with open eyes. He had made dinner. The apartment was warm and smelled like something good, and he was sitting at her kitchen table, the one that was slightly too big, reading a document and not looking up immediately when she came in, and the specific normalcy of it. The domestic, unhurried normalcy of a man comfortable enough to keep reading. When she walked in, moved through her like warm water. How was it? He asked, looking up. Good, she said. She took off her coat. There was a woman in the front row. He waited. She had the hands, Elena said. The hands people have when they've been holding themselves very still for a very long time. She hung up her coat. She asked me how I knew it was real, and I think she was asking because she needs to know the answer for herself. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Did she take your card? She took my card, Elena said, and Margaret's number. He looked at her with the expression she had come to know best. Not composure, not performance, but the real face underneath all of it. The face of a man who had spent 30 years carrying the weight of a question nobody asked at the right time, and who had found in the specific course of one Wednesday evening at Carmine's restaurant what it felt like to finally answer it. You're doing it, he said. The chain, you're keeping it going. Someone has to go first, she said. She crossed to the kitchen table and sat down across from him and reached across for his hand. And then someone has to make it easier for the next one. And then the next. She looked at him steadily. That's the whole job. That's what the question was always for. He held her hand. Outside Chicago was doing what it always did, vast and indifferent and brilliant, with the specific light of a city that never fully slept, full of 1 million people navigating their own private wars, some of them losing, some of them winning, some of them sitting across a table from the wrong thing and waiting for someone to ask the right question. Elena Carter sat in her own kitchen, in her own life, chosen piece by piece and day by day, and felt the specific, complete, undefended peace of a woman who knew exactly who she was. She had not been saved by power. She had not been rescued by a man with resources and connections, and 2 men who appeared from nowhere beside a table. She had been given a question, and she had answered it herself. That was the whole story. That had always been the whole story. A woman who was asked if she was there by choice, and who for the first time in years finally wasn't.